Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 40 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. And we're here nice in the cozy fall season. I hope you guys are ready because you're just going to be joined for the next two episodes by me, Trevor Dame, and as always, by Matt Feuerstein. We're just going to do a fun run of shows, just us two, and you, the listener, or I guess if you have a great listening party, it'll be less cozy. It'll be, unless there's a lot of people contained in a small room when you Matt, save me. I'm floundering here. Help me out.
I mean, usually I support you when you are self-deprecating and I build you up, but no, you were kind of floundering right there. Let's be honest. So this is the podcast where we review Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I was hoping it was the podcast about chain restaurants, because that I could really get in on.
I like two kinds of chains, Matt. Chain wrestling and chain restaurants.
Ooh, I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah. Do you think anybody has ThROH The Years listening parties? If so, I got to come up with some good weasel puns to tell everybody about it. That's a reference for the old folks out there.
I would imagine. I think we've been told this maybe once or twice, but I bet you there's definitely been like a very bored, aggravated spouse that's been forced to listen to us,
like in the road trip, right?
Yeah.
Boy, that spouse is probably extremely aggravated. Yeep. I
apologize, spouses of the world that are about to be bored for 2.5 to 3 hours.
I'm still wondering if there are any women that listen to this podcast, like a single one that listens to it regularly. I have yet to see any evidence of it.
I look at my Twitter and I didn't realize, but I was just checking the analytics one day, and it actually tells you how many people of each gender are like following you on Twitter. And I imagine my Twitter probably appeals to more women than this, and it is unlikely that many women are listening to this, I would imagine.
Yes, definitely unlikely that many are. The question now is, are any? Yeah, because if we're at like a full zero, I don't know. I think, Trevor, you need to start posting some pics of yourself maybe to get this thing afloat a little bit.
That would scare everybody away.
No.
But we don't really need to promote because we're on a great podcast network, and that's the Pro Wrestling Only podcast network, Matt. And there's a lot of great shows, but one thing I always like to do is spotlight when a new show joins us, and we do have a new show since the last time we were on. In fact, wrestling's changed quite a bit since the last time we did a show, and one thing that's changed is AEW now has a TV show, and guess what, Matt? Pro Wrestling Only now has a podcast devoted just to covering that TV show. It's called Boom Goes the Dynamite, and they are covering every episode of AEW Dynamite on TNT. So even though I think Pro Wrestling Only is probably like the best network in terms of covering just a crazy wide range of old wrestling from all over, like chances are you will find at least one show covering a topic you like. We also got stuff like this, which is, if you're into the newest, hippest, cool kids thing, and I'm making cool hand gestures right now to indicate how hip I am, then we've got you covered with that too.
What are cool hand gestures? Are you like, I don't know, dabbing?
I'm doing that thing that Jack Evans did on the show we're covering tonight, where he kind of like touches his thumbs. I think he's trying to do an N, maybe.
Yeah, a G and an N, but neither of them look like either of those letters. Yeah, that is cool and hip, because that was only 15 and a half years ago.
That's where most of my references and interests get locked into. That's about like the most recent thing before my brain kind of crusted over. So
that's probably fair. I was like 2004. I was 21 or almost 21 when the show that you're reviewing happened. So yeah, I think I stopped developing as a human right then and there.
I definitely peaked there, but this is a really interesting show and a really interesting time in Ring of Honor's history. So before we get to the show proper, there's a few news little things that happened between the last show and this one. First one I'll go to is from the Wrestling Observer. Dave Meltzer wrote, Spanky got a huge reaction in Lexington, Massachusetts last week, and Dave is referring to the last show we covered, Round Robin Challenge 3. Dave continues, they want to use him when available, they being Ring of Honor. But it's hard to book him because Zero One, who he's under contract to, doesn't give him his dates until late. They're resigned to the idea that when they have a show and he's off, they'll plug him in as an attraction, but won't be able to do much in the way of storylines with him. So this is just a little interesting one because, as something we mentioned I think on the At Our Best Rob Feinstein episode, Ring of Honor would have some problems booking 01 talent for a little while in 2004 because I not necessarily completely due to what you would think, but more because I believe 01's parent company was suing Rob Feinstein and RF Video over selling some of their tapes without permission. And so at that time, 01 decided, well, we're not going to allow his company to use him, even though at this point he was technically said to have been gone. But I guess once it was very clear he was gone for real, that got sorted out because in 2005 we got a fair bit of Spanky in Ring of Honor.
Well, also at the end of 2004, didn't like 01 sort of stop existing as we knew it? So like that might have something to do with it, right? Kind of like changed ownership, and then it kind of went away for a little while, didn't it?
I mean, 01 I believe is still around in some form.
Right,
so
right. But like, it came back. But I know that like Hashimoto like stopped being in control of it. And from what I understand, I'm pretty sure like they didn't run shows for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be the best person to ask for this. Hopefully there's some 01 podcast out there that can answer this question. Maybe here's the suggested name: Counting is Fun, the 01 podcast.
I like it.
There. That one's free. Geez, that's the worst thing I've ever said.
No, what are you kidding me? You said so many worse things.
In this episode. Next up, another note from The Observer. Dave Meltzer wrote, Ricky Steamboat hasn't agreed to do a match with CM Punk yet, but he's also getting in better shape and has been more agreeable to doing more and more with him to keep the storyline alive. Steamboat is strong on the idea that he doesn't want to come in and have a bad match, and Sapolsky has offered him the idea of doing a tag or six-man, so he just has to do his trademark stuff. Gabe Sapolsky is trying to push Steamboat as their version of Terry Funk. So, Matt, a question I want to ask you is, obviously, doing a show in 15 years later, we have the advantage of knowing how this plays out, and Steamboat doesn't really do any kind of official match. He still does physical angles. So the thing I want to ask you, Matt, and there's no way for sure that we could know this, but in your personal opinion, knowing that Steamboat years later would do some good matches in WWE, do you think Steamboat honestly at this point wasn't sure if he'd be able or want to do physical stuff again? Or do you feel like maybe in the back of his mind he's like, maybe I shouldn't do a match here when if I do come back, there's a payday problem. The money's probably coming back in WWE to do that one more match.
That's a tough one because like when he finally did come back, was it this huge drawing like card, this huge payday? I mean, yes, he worked WrestleMania, but would wrestling a match in ROH first have prohibited that from happening? I don't know. I guess it's hard to know what the mindset is of a guy. I think that maybe he did think that about there being a payday, but I also think that he probably was a little insecure about coming back and doing a match, and probably the WWE money just made him less insecure about it.
See, I should have gone and researched it, but I vaguely recall, I think Steamboat brought up the idea of him coming back for one more match to WWE and not the other way around. I might be wrong about that, but it's interesting in this because in recent episodes when we've looked back at some of the news, some of the reporting has been like, Steamboat's scared about doing stuff because he's worried about, looking bad if he's not able to be his old self and stuff like that.
Was there an insurance policy involved as well?
Yeah, see that's another great point.
Lloyd's of London, yeah.
There were lots of wrestlers who were like, well, I could do something, but then I'd probably lose this sweet, like you said, Lloyd's of London insurance settlement. So, yeah, I don't think there's any way we can know for sure. I will say, watching the Ring of Honor shows of this period, we've seen Steamboat every show. It seems like he gets a little more confident and does a little bit more, and to me, that feels like a genuine, like he's just getting more excited and more into it and more like, yeah, I can take a bump. Yeah, I can throw some offense. and that could just be the natural progression of the angle. But to me, watching these shows, it has felt like maybe he is kind of realizing mid storyline that, yeah, maybe I can do this again. So
What happened on tonight's show, the show we're reviewing tonight, is kind of a match, even if it's not officially one.
yeah, and that's the other thing, which was it's funny that Observer Story says that Gabe was looking at pushing Steamboat as their version of Terry Funk, because one of the things I was thinking about during the angle is, interviews Steamboat gave or news bits around this time was, again, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to have a good full match with somebody like CM Punk. But, and this is no offense to Terry Funk, who is one of the all-time greatest wrestling talents of all time, in my opinion, like an all-time legend. But I think after watching this show that at this moment in his career, Ricky Steamboat could have had a better match with CM Punk than Terry Funk did in 2003, which we saw in Ring of Honor.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, better than in 2003, for sure. Better than what Funk was doing in, like, 94, 95, 97. Possibly that, too, honestly. But Terry Funk, for whatever he had lost in, maybe his execution by that point, he was still willing to take a lot of bumps in that era. And would Steamboat have been able to do that? That's a better question.
Yeah, and I mean, the Terry Funk match with Punk was not bad by any means, but I was just thinking in the sense of, if you're Steamboat and your mindset is, I don't want to embarrass myself, no one said that Funk Punk match was embarrassing, and I think he could have at least done as well as that.
Right, but Steamboat, in terms of athleticism and execution, that was sort of his thing, Yeah. So there's a different standards. Obviously, Terry Funk is one of the greatest of all time, like you said, but Steamboat's greatness comes really more from his physical grace and his athleticism in a way. Funk was obviously very athletic, but it was a little different, right? Funk could do the brawling stuff, the bumping stuff, and Steamboat really had to, be a smooth wrestler to really live up to the Ricky Steamboat legacy.
Yeah, you're right. Funk was highly adaptable, partly by necessity, which is why he had such a long career, where Steamboat kind of only ever really had to be the one thing. And maybe didn't in his mind think he could be anything else, but
possibly. I mean, certainly, if you're coming back as a nostalgia act, that's what people want to see from you. If he could have successfully transitioned into a new version of Ricky Steamboat, that would have been pretty cool. But maybe he just wasn't something that was occurring to him.
And our last little newswire bit, our last news story is from the Ring of Honor Newswire. It's dumb. I just like this. It just made me chuckle. This is from May 17, 2004's Ring of Honor Newswire. In the Newswire, they wrote, Ox Baker told Ring of Honor officials that he's looking for someone to pass the heart punch down to. Okay, whatever. That's the entire news story. They literally wrote, okay, comma, whatever, period. And
I need to know the backstory. Are you trying to promote it? Are you trying to poo-poo it? If so, isn't there only one guy doing both? So, why are you... I mean, Gabe, what's up?
I've had people tell me that, this Ox Baker stuff, he just stumbled around and, it wasn't planned. I have no idea. It's just...
Why do you put it in the Newswire, then?
It's the most perplexing thing. It is so weird. This, I don't know. It's interesting, but... What's arguably more interesting, well, I wouldn't argue even, it's just flat out more interesting, is the show we're covering today, and that is Generation Next. It took place May 22nd, 2004, in a tent outside the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory in front of a reported crowd of, according to The Observer, it was 450. We'll get into a few notes that it kind of... There's a bunch of variance in the reported numbers for the show, but somewhere between 350 and 500. We always use the Observer attendance, which in this case is 450. So, yeah, they ran in a tent. So, yeah, we have a lot of different reporting about why and they were in a tent and the circumstances around that. We got reporting from The Observer, from The Torch, and from PW Insider. They agree on a lot of the major points, but they all bring a little bit of different information to the table. So I guess I'll read all of these, and yeah, I think this is good. So we'll go to The Observer first, and they wrote, The 522 show in Philadelphia, which once again went head-to-head with a WWE house show, was designed to build a new main group called Generation Next of leader Alex Shelley plus Austin Aries, Roderick Strong, and Jack Evans. The show drew about 450 fans outdoors in a makeshift tent next to the National Guard Armory, since the building was being used for storing ammunition. Some blamed the Philadelphia Flyers' 7th game of the Stanley Cup semifinals for hurting the crowd, but a large percentage of the Ring of Honor fan base comes to Philadelphia shows from outside the Philly area. Ring of Honor has a real challenge on its hands right now because now it has to battle that syndrome that their stars are gone. Sapolsky thinks that there has been a backlash from not running Philadelphia enough, and they are going to try and run more often, which means to find a new building since the Armory simply isn't available often enough for them. We got negative comments in that people who purchased general admission tickets at the show had to stand, and by the time you saw Alex Shelley out for the 4th time, it got tiring, and standing to watch wrestling for a 4-hour show is tough, even with good weather. So yeah, that's the Observer's coverage of it. And
I have definitely stood for the entire ROH show multiple times. If the show's good enough, you really don't mind it too much. I stood for Joe and Kobashi the whole time, and that was after having a retail job where I had to stand all day prior to that. So my back hurt a lot, but it was fine. It was worth it.
I mean, people go to music festivals where they stand for hours and hours and hours. I will say this is a bit of a different situation where I think fans were coming to the show expecting to be able to sit down, and they were, because in fact, Matt, as we will see in the next couple reportings, fans did not know when they were coming to the show what they were in for. I'll go to the Torch next. Wade Keller writes, Ring of Honor's May 22nd event in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the National Guard Armory had to be moved outdoors under a tent due to the mobilization of troops in the National Guard Armory. Ring of Honor did not announce that the show would be held outdoors ahead of time, perhaps fearing it would discourage walk-ups. In fact, many wrestlers didn't know ahead of time either. As it turned out, the weather was pleasant and it led to a unique atmosphere for Ring of Honor. The venue wasn't the only challenge Ring of Honor officials faced. They were also head up against a WWE Raw house show the same night, just as happened in St. Paul, Minnesota last month. They drew between 350 and 500, according to various estimates. Regarding whether WWE running head-to-head with Ring of Honor twice in the last month or two is a coincidence or not, one wrestler says, quote, Vince McMahon would think it was beneath him to officially acknowledge Ring of Honor as enough of a threat to intentionally do that, unquote. So, first off, like, Matt, do you think there's anything to the ethics of not telling people ahead of time that, like, oh yeah, you think you're going to the Armory, it's actually going to be in this tent next to the Armory, like, the wrestlers and the fans not knowing, that's a bit skeevy. Like, I understand being afraid of people not walking up because of the idea of, oh, we're going to go to a tent, but at the same time, if you came with a ticket and thought, oh, I'm going to sit down in the back and whatever in a nice indoor building, and instead you're like, oh, your general admission, you're going to be standing outside essentially to watch the show, I'd be a little, I mean, I would roll with it, but I can see some people being understandably like miffed at that.
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely say if you know in advance that that's going to happen, obviously, like to the best of your ability. And, you know, they had the website, they could have done it. I have a feeling that probably most of the fans didn't mind that much. But sure, it could have hurt the walk up. I mean, it's the price you pay. It's life. Yeah. I don't think you should withhold pertinent information because you're afraid of that. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Clearly, it wasn't the end of the world that they did that. But yeah, if you're just asking me purely what's the right thing to do, I think, yeah, tell it, you know, being open and honest about what's going to happen is the right thing. I wanted to add one other thing about some of what you were saying, because you mentioned that they were worried about there was a backlash because they hadn't run Philly enough.
Yeah.
So they were going to run it more often. And it's interesting because they did run Philly more often for the rest of 2004. They ran it in June for an unplanned reason because they weren't allowed to run Baltimore. Then they ran it again over the summer. Then they ran it again in October and December. But the funny thing is that by 2005, they were back to running it very sparingly. I think they ran it, I'm trying to think, maybe only 3 times actually in 2005 on the top of my head. I might be wrong about that, but that's how I remember it. And I remember people saying like, "Oh, the Philly market is kind of dead for us," until the CZW feud in 2006 brought it back to life. So it's just interesting that to see like the trajectory of ROH's relationship with Philadelphia.
And it's also interesting when you think about Philly was Ring of Honor's home base to start with, and then their first regular secondary market afterwards was Boston, and we're not too far away from them kind of saying goodbye to Boston for quite a while too. So it's interesting how in the next year how much Ring of Honor's touring situation changes, where it becomes more of a New Jersey, Chicago as the big markets, where in the first couple of years it was mainly Philly and Boston.
Yeah, and then I mean, pretty soon it'll be New York City also
Yeah.
as their number one market. And yeah, really, it's really CZW that brings Philly back for ROH, like I said.
And finally, that brings us to Mike Johnson, who had the most to say about this. He generally on local, I think he actually, I believe someone right before we started recording caught me on Twitter and said, "Oh yeah, I was on a Mike Johnson bus tour to Generation Next." So obviously Mike was very close to this situation because he would at this point, I guess, run some bus tours to events, including Ring of Honor ones. Mike Johnson wrote in PW Insider some background. With less than a week's notice, Ring of Honor learned they had lost their scheduled venue for the 522 show when the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory was mobilized. That basically means the military was going to use it, so outside events aren't allowed in. It was the latest in black clouds hovering over the 522 event as WWE was in town running a Raw brand house show, the Philadelphia Phillies had a home game, and the Philadelphia Flyers ended up playing a sudden death NHL playoff game in Tampa Bay. Feeling that if they had to cancel the date, it would have caused more damage to the company when they couldn't afford it, Ring of Honor got permission to hold the show in the backyard of the Armory, and with only several days' notice, rented out a huge tent to cover the ring, lighting, equipment. He could use a little editing there, Mike. Several rows of fans. I am told the situation cost a great deal for the promotion, but they felt they needed to go through with the show. Although plans were sealed on Tuesday or Wednesday to hold the show outdoors, the promotion denied there were problems with the building when approached by PWInsider.com on Wednesday, as one source said that whatever building issues that were with the Armory, they were, quote, resolved, unquote. Resolved ended up being the tent idea, although before that decision was made, they did make overtures to book the ECW arena as well, which didn't end up working out. Many of the wrestlers were unaware of any changes until they arrived that afternoon at the Armory. I am under the belief that the promotion denied the building issues in order to protect the attendance, which was already hurting from the other factors, from being affected by the predictions of bad weather all week. My personal feeling is that they should have announced something anyway, if for no other reason than to give the fans who had purchased tickets a chance to prepare for being outdoors for several hours. Although other than mosquitoes and the like, it wasn't a harsh situation to deal with if you didn't have allergies. The weather, which ended up being nice and cool, allowed fans to enjoy the show without the usual heat issues involved in sitting in a small packed building. However, if the weather had been rainy and wet, Ring of Honor would have had several hundred unhappy fans sitting outdoors without notice and with every right to ask for a refund, in my opinion. And that would have been an irresponsible maneuver. Thankfully for them, the weather was the one place where Ring of Honor hasn't had bad luck as of late. Although there was plenty of snickering jokes about having a show under a tent by those live before the show began, in truth, the setting and the weather create a much more relaxed and fun atmosphere than some of the regular Ring of Honor venues. There was none of the stuffiness that sometimes pervades live Ring of Honor events among their fan base, and none of the sweltering heat. Although the show appeared to draw in the 350 range, Ring of Honor sources listed the crowd as just under 500, the promotion was happy enough with the way the show came off live that there was talk of doing additional outdoor events down the line. Now, Matt, my memory for this kind of stuff is horrible. Did Ring of Honor ever do additional outdoor Ring of Honor events? I don't think they did.
There was one in a tent in 2006 in Connecticut, I believe. Glory by Honor 5 Night 1. That was also in a tent. I wasn't there, but that actually might have been a rainy day, now that I think about it. But I forget what the reason was. But yes, that was there. So there was at least one more in a tent. As far as outdoor shows, they did run for a few years in a row shows, in the later era, in the Sinclair era, at this minor league baseball stadium here in Brooklyn. They would funnily enough call them Field of Honor shows because it was on a baseball field, but those were fully outdoors, like as in like no roof or anything.
It is interesting that I guess it adds a little background where from what Mike Johnson's saying, I didn't go back and look up the weather reports from this time because I'm not that pathetic. I'm not that devoid of other things to do.
That would be something.
But it does sound like there was forecast for rain, like rain. Judging from things I've read, that people were expecting rain. It was like a happy surprise that in fact didn't rain on the show. So that also kind of puts the choice not to tell people about it into a bit more of a negative light. The idea that, well, we can't tell people because they might get caught in the rain, and we kind of want them to be caught in the rain. That's because that means they're at the show. That's
yeah, that would be. I would be pissed about that if it was like a cold, rainy, like windy day, and I show up like expecting to be sitting inside of a hot building, and I'm completely unprepared for the weather. Man, that would be annoying. That would kind of ruin the show.
But I will say that the crowd for them, like you hear these couple of comments from people at the show that didn't like standing or stuff, but most of the crowd did have chairs. It was more in the back, and the crowd sounded lively and like they were having a great time for the most part. So
I'd say the crowd, he probably wasn't as loud as it would have been inside the building, but it was a pretty solid reaction to most of the stuff.
Yeah, especially for a crowd, that's probably a bit lower than the usual Ring of Honor Philly crowd. It still sounded, pretty loud, and they didn't seem dampened, literally or figuratively, Matt.
I think part of it is they're comparing it to the most recent show they had in Philly, which was Final Battle, which was the biggest ROH audience yet up to that point, like a really huge crowd, like over 1,000 people, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, in comparison, this seems like a huge failure, even though, compared to where the crowds they draw most of the recent venues, it's not that bad.
And the last thing before we get to the show proper is they in that Mike Johnson story, he referenced trying to book ECW Arena, and you might wonder, well, why didn't Ring of Honor book ECW Arena at this time, especially since I think they ran it later? And I saved a quote from around the time of before the second-year anniversary show from Mike Johnson where he kind of explains that, and this will be the last news quote I have. But Mike Johnson writes, Ring of Honor ran into a snag in its search for running more events in Philadelphia. With the National Guard Armory not available again until the fall after their announced 5/22 date, Ring of Honor was looking to book a date at the ECW Arena. The venue turned down the promotion, citing the fact that CZW and 3PW already run there monthly. 3PW's Todd Gordon confirmed that the two promotions returned to the venue after the fallout of the Philadelphia Wrestling Wars and eviction of XPW. Both promotions agreed to a rent increase in exchange for exclusivity to prevent, quote, oversaturation of the building. No other promotion can get into the building without their consent, which honestly isn't going to happen for Ring of Honor for obvious competitive reasons. World One will be moving to a new Philadelphia location for similar reasons when they run again in April. That show got canceled. When Ring of Honor was formed, the promotion distinctly wanted to stay away from the ECW arena, so they weren't in the shadow of ECW. 2 years later, that is no longer a concern, but they aren't able to get into the building. So the thing that that really struck home to me reading this is thinking about just comparing it to the news stories we read when Ring of Honor first started, which is how much the Northeast wrestling scene and really wrestling in general changed in just a couple of years, where in 2002, when Ring of Honor started, there was so much Philly wrestling war news, and there was so much stuff about, who's using which old ECW guy and which promotions want to kind of be the replacement ECW and which companies were trying to get away with it, to the point where, as it says here, Ring of Honor was like, we don't even want to run the ECW arena because we don't want to be compared to them. And within 2 years' time, it's like, that's not a concern anymore. Like, Ring of Honor's in a distinct enough position where they're not worried about the idea that if they run ECW Arena, it's going to make them look like they're copying ECW.
Right. Well, it makes sense.
Unfortunately for them, it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, but it makes sense.
For a while.
It makes sense, though, right? Like, it makes sense that they have established their identity. People who go to indie wrestling, like, they know Ring of Honor. They know Ring of Honor has their own stars. and especially by the time they finally do run the ECW arena in 2006. At the time, I think it was called the New Alhambra Arena or something. Um, and I think they were able to run it. Was 3PW even still around by
Uh,
2006?
I'm not sure, but you'd think something changed because obviously they did not have this exclusivity rental right anymore by that
Well,
point.
right, and also ROH was working with CZW at this point, so CZW obviously gave their blessing for it. They in fact had a double header that night and then I think by the time ROH started running that arena regularly for HDNet TV tapings, CZW, were they even still running that building at all? They don't run it now, right? CZW, they don't run in that building.
Uh, I am not aware of much of what CCW does at this point, but
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of places run ECW Arena now. It's under its what 1800th name change and renovation or something. But
Right.
yeah,
But I for some reason I'm gonna actually look this up because I don't want to seem that stupid, but I want to see where it looks like. Yeah, it looks like most of their shows now are in New Jersey and not at the ECW arena. But I don't know how long that's been the case for.
it's amazing how much power that arena holds over people. I mean, it's a testament to running the same place over and over again and building good memories somewhere. Because there are still to this day people that are like, "Wow, I finally get to wrestle in ECW Arena." To some people it is on that level of a Madison Square Garden.
Yeah,
I
it
guess
was
it,
it was a it was a big it was like a really big deal in terms of setting the tone of wrestling in the late '90s and what it became. Um, I think it deserves that status. The place itself isn't much to look at, but what happened there, I think it's worthy of some sort of reverence.
it's amazing to think that how how any building, like if your show is good, like people always go, oh, this show has a this arena has a bad location, or this is an uncomfortable building, or whatever. But if you have a really great product, the building doesn't hurt you. The product actually helps the building. Like in the last month, I believe the Reseda Hall where PWG ran for so many years is starting to be torn down, and I saw a lot of form of talent, you know, tweet about how this is a sad thing, and the kind of wistful for the time they worked there. And by all accounts, that building was not a great building. It was cramped. It got super hot, but the shows from that period were so good. It created this kind of romance with the building. So
Right, and also like the specialness of the crowds, for better or worse, back then. I just checked, by the way. It looks like CZW hasn't run that building since 2015.
tough times for CZW. But yeah, so that's all the background. Just know, if you haven't seen the show, yes, it's running in a tent, so keep that in your imagination as we go through the show. And the show opens Generation Next with, for the second straight show, we open with a backstage promo from the Prophecy of Allison Danger, BJ Whitmer, and Dan Moff. Danger says tonight's the night. They beat the Second City Saints last week, and they're going to do it again here. Moff reminisces about joining the Prophecy last year. He calls it the day that he turned his career around. And then which I guess it kind of did in terms of a kayfabe storyline perspective. Moff recaps what happened on the last show where the Prophecy won the tag titles, and then they lost them an hour later. He gets into a big stare down with BJ Whitmer, and we get the usual thing they've done a million times where they talk about how they hate each other, but when they work together, they're a great tag team.
One of like several big stare downs with BJ Whitmer tonight, also.
It's getting a little overdone. Moff says tonight is the most important night in the history of the Prophecy, because if they don't win tonight, it could be the death of the Prophecy. And Danger and Whitmer both act very surprised to hear this. So,
By the way, speaking of overdone, this is the second straight DVD that begins with a slow camera pan up the body from feet to head of Allison Danger. Two shows in a row open with that exact same camera shot. That shit is old.
yeah, it's just funny that it's basically the same thing from the very last show, the same opening.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that, but yeah, the exact same camera shot to open the show. Next, we jump elsewhere backstage for Good Times, Great Memories with our host, Colt Cabana. His guest is Trent Acid, who Colt points out is now a two-time guest, so I'm not sure. I didn't go back and look at this. Trent Acid might be the first two-time guest in Good Times, Great Memories history. Colt says that Gary Michael Capetta told him that Trent is now going singles. He's not in a tag team anymore in Ring of Honor. Trent says he's taking some time off for Trent, and he says he's taking some tea time. Colt asked Trent about the who shit in the Carnage Crew's bag storyline, and Colt wants to know what the turd was like and if it had corn in it. Trent says it was, quote, awesome, and that the Carnage Crew deserved it. Trent says he knows who did it, but he's not a rat, he's Italian. The Carnage Crew, all four of them, then barge in. They demand answers for Trent. Trent says that the people who shit in the bag are here in the building tonight, and the Carnage Crew then says, to ask Trent, bring them to the ring later tonight. They leave, and then Trent checks on Colt, who we find was hiding under his desk during all of this. Trent assures Colt that everything is cool and that he's got plans for tonight.
I was really unclear about where Trent Acid falls in this whole thing. Why does he know about it? Why is he the one that's kind of announcing this? Obviously, later on, he's going to be involved in the angle. What does he have to do with any of this? I don't really understand. I will say he does have a marijuana-themed T-shirt.
Yeah, I don't think obviously he doesn't join the new Carnage Crew, so it's not like he knew about it because he was in on it. I guess maybe it was just maybe he walked by and caught them and enjoyed watching them shit in a bag and then was like, "Don't worry, guys, I'll keep it to myself." I don't know, but yeah.
And also, how did the Carnage Crew know that he were they just did they always just listen at the door with a cup to the door every time Good Times Great Memories is recorded, and they're like, oh no, this guy knows about our poop thing, and they barged in.
Was it revealed on a recent show that Trent Acid knew somehow? I'm not sure. That might have been a thing.
I don't remember hearing that, but I suppose I could have missed it.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird wrinkle though that Trent Acid is strangely involved with this angle. That he's just basically the deep throat of who shit in the Carnage Crew's bags, and yet he doesn't really become involved in the storyline much after this, to my memory. So, yeah, really weird situation. But then the show launches. We're finally under the tent. We're seeing what's happening live. The Ring Crew Express make their way out to the ring, followed by the Christopher Street Connection, escorted by Ariel. So I guess that period where they said Ring of Honor we reported in an earlier show that the word was Ring of Honor was going to cool out booking the Christopher Street Connection because of the Feinstein thing. Feels like they're confident enough to put them back on the show. We're told that these two teams are going to be part of a tag team scramble tonight. And on commentary, Gabe tells us that tonight's show, Generation Next, is going to be about 8 pieces of up-and-coming talent facing off against each other in matches drawn at random, and that the live fans are going to be given ballots to vote on who impresses them the most. Gabe runs down the 4 up-and-coming matches we're going to see tonight. Jack Evans versus Roderick Strong, Alex Shelley versus Izzy, Austin Aries versus Hydro, and Jimmy Jacobs versus Nigel McGuinness. Mark Nolte, who joins Gabe on commentary, says that the Christopher Street Connection, he says about the Christopher Street Connection that Adrian Street is rolling in his grave and he's not even dead. One of many timely references Mark will make.
Well, it's better than when people who was the one who said that Don Morocco was rolling over in his grave and they didn't even note that he wasn't dead. Yeah. So at least Mark has that going for him.
Yeah, the other Don Morocco's looking down and smiling.
Yeah, something like that. There was another line by Mark Nolte. So the Christopher Street Connection does their usual thing where they start making out with each other, and Mark goes, "Chris, is it normal for the gay community to act like this in public?" And I'm like, to act like what? Kiss each other? What is the thing that they're doing that you find abnormal? He's trying hard not to sound homophobic, but he doesn't do a good job of it.
Not since AJ Styles has someone used the phrase "the gay community" with such disgust. Which isn't normal for the gay community to act like this in public. I don't know about this gay community, Gabe. Yeah. You'll have to set me straight on it, so to speak.
Right, and just acting like it's weird for two gay lovers to kiss each other. I don't know. Anyway,
but it's par for the course for how they're reacted to in Ring of Honor.
Yes, I mean it's
Unfortunately.
certainly nowhere near as bad as what some commentators have said in the past.
So right at that moment, Roderick Strong, Jack Evans, Alex Shelley, and Austin Aries hit the ring. They attack the Christopher Street Connection. That's the end of their involvement for tonight. Shelley gets on the mic and he says there's not going to be a tag team scramble match or any fan voting tonight. He says he doesn't trust putting his career in the hands of the fans. And he says that these four people in the ring right now, they have no need to fight each other. They're the four best athletes in the company. They're the generation next. Alex introduces all four one by one. He says he has talent on loan from God. Roderick is the messiah of the backbreaker. Jack Evans is the man who can defy gravity without even trying. And Austin Aries is the most explosive athlete in the company, bar none. Shelley then has a hold of a flimsy small plastic bag of what he says is supposed to be the fan ballots for the show. And he throws them in the garbage, which is, I think, just a larger plastic bag. Shelley Shelley says Ring of Honor is not a place for freaks, so another bit of
Yeah, that's definitely some homophobia right there.
yeah, or kids on the ring crew. Dunn and Marcos take offense and jump in the ring. They say their catchphrase to a huge crowd reaction, like, God, this is another one of those shows where you go, holy shit, the Ring Crew Express were over. They get a loud chant before they can even finish talking. Marcos says they're not going to take it anymore, and they attack Generation Next, but within 10 or 15 seconds, the Generation Next has dispatched them. Then Special K's music starts to play, and as they were supposed to be part of the tag scramble match that was previously scheduled, they come out, Cheech, Hydro, Angel Dust, who's still wearing his neck brace, selling the big pile driver off the scramble cage he took at Our Best, Izzy, Dixie, and Becky Bayless. Hydro says he doesn't feel in a party mood, which continues his angle that he's getting a bit more serious. Then finally, Special K hit the ring, and all of a sudden we get a ref in the ring, and the bell is rung, so we have a completely impromptu match.
I just want to say before we talk about this match,
yeah.
I just want to mention I sort of thought this was cool. This was almost sort of like a payoff to the "We're Not Going to Take It Anymore" tour because finally they actually are in a moment where that matters. Like the new Generation Next is forming. They're coming out. They're basically brushing Dunn and Marcos aside, and then Dunn and Marcos are like, wait. We're still here. We're not going to take this anymore. And I feel like that sort of pays off. And of course, they still get their asses kicked. But I sort of thought just like that was cool because it was now done in like a very meaningful moment. It sort of was built up to.
I agree. And I have to think, before I was going to throw it to you for the match, I was actually going to ask you kind of what you think about this angle to start off with, because I think it's interesting what Gabe did in the sense of, first off, Generation Next, when you think he created this entire fake show, he created a fake lineup. We only get one of those four announced Generation Next matches that I read off earlier that Gabe said we're going to have on this show. And this whole idea of there's going to be a fan ballot and all this stuff, Gabe creates this entire fake show concept knowing it's going to be used with this idea that it's something for these four guys to hijack and overtake, and which I think is an interesting idea. And also, I think one reason why Generation Next, why this initial angle works, is because it's not done in Ring of Honor frequently up to this point. Like, in a lot of other companies, I don't feel like this would have had as great of an impact because a lot of companies do the whole we're taking over thing over and over again. Like, that's been copied ad nauseum since the days of the Outsiders and the NWO. But the fact that in Ring of Honor, almost always new guys get broken in, especially if they're at like a lower name level, doing 5-minute matches right after intermission. The fact that for once you have these four guys come in that have done a little bit of spot duty before this, but are basically saying like, no, we're just going to like do run-ins and cancel matches and get on the mic immediately in front of the live crowd and create this whole story that we're not going to, that they're not going to take it, Matt. I think it works because it's different for Ring of Honor. I think in another company, it might not have worked.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, Ring of Honor kind of had was playing with a bit of a pat hand in the undercards, and this was a kind of a needed and wanted shakeup. So that's why it worked. Yeah, I don't think there was a single fan there that was mad that they didn't get the original concept and lineup. I think this was clearly an upgrade because it felt important. It was a new thing. The execution by Shelley on the mic was good. and I think that it clearly worked. So I think it was a great idea. I think this whole thing, this whole concept, this whole angle, and what happens after this show was, I think, just a home run. Like it was worked out as good as I think Gabe could have hoped for.
Do you think there was somewhere in that crowd, there was at least one fan that quietly to themselves is just disappointed? It's like, I wanted to vote on that piece of paper. Like, I thought they'd be voting tonight. Like, there's got to be one, right? 1%'s like, I wanted to pick and make my voice be heard.
Maybe at this point, but not by the end of the show, I don't think. I mean, there are probably a lot of people that really wanted to see a really long John Walters versus Jimmy Rave match. Um, but um, but I don't think anyone was too sad about that voting thing.
And I think that's another sign this angle was really well done and that they were listening to what the crowd wanted. Because a lot of matches on this card get changed, things get interrupted, and although there's some live reports that a few fans didn't like Alex Shelley coming out so many times, in terms of what I hear watching the DVD, like there are pops for Generation Next pretty much every time they interrupt a match and make a new one up on the fly. Like it doesn't sound like anyone gets disappointed. Like there's no bullshit or refund. Like no one's disappointed at that the cards get changed the way they are. Like no one's pissed off that they didn't get to see Jack Evans versus Roderick Strong, although honestly that would have been probably a really fun match to watch. But yeah, they're excited for what they're seeing.
Exactly. And yeah, they do something more interesting. And one of the most fun matches they had booked, which is Nigel McGuinness versus Jimmy Jacobs, they still give the fans.
Yeah, that's the one we still get to keep from the 4. But what we get now is an impromptu opener. Generation Next of Austin Aries, Jack Evans, and Roderick Strong defeat Special K of Angel Dust, Dixie, and Izzy via triple pinfall in 754 after Aries hits a 450, Strong hits a big backbreaker variation, and Jack Evans hits the 630. Matt, this is the very first official Generation Next match. What'd you think?
Yeah, I think this match is better if you think of it more like an angle than a match. Because as a match, it was kind of sloppy. Like there was a scramble-esque quality to it, but it wasn't one of the best scrambles in terms of like flow. They have Angel Dust wearing a neck brace as he wrestles, which as much as I like this angle, I thought that was pretty dumb.
Aries does pull it off eventually during the match, though.
Yes, but even just that concept is so silly to me. But there are definitely cool moves going on. At first, I feel like the crowd doesn't totally know what to make of it. Evans is like flip bumping like crazy on like every little thing. He like takes a big flip bump at the beginning. But like they go into some of their big stuff. It's really just a series of big moves at a certain point. Izzy does like a springboard flip dive. Evans does a reverse Hurricane Rana on Izzy. Even through this match, Gabe is noting, like, Hydro, he seems more serious on the outside, which you really can't tell too much on camera, but obviously Gabe knows where he's going with it. Once it breaks down, it sort of ends with a bunch of moves, and then they kind of do a consecutive move thing where Aries hits a 450 on Dixie, Strong hits a backbreaker on Angel Dust, and then Jack Evans hits a 630 on Izzy, and they get kind of a triple pin. So yeah. I didn't think this was a good match, honestly, but I don't think it really mattered that much. It was a cool segment, and it got the point across.
During the match, at some point, Mark Nolte on commentary says this match doesn't really have any flow to it, and I think I would agree there. It like you said, is just basically a collection of spots. I feel like we've seen better from scrambles, and it's a little disappointing considering the talent involved, but I still think it was perfectly enjoyable. It's like a middle of the road match. But the one thing I was kind of surprised by was that I would say Special K got 50 or maybe 60% of the offense in this match. And it doesn't matter that much, especially because, like you just said, Generation X gets a really strong, basically triple pin win for this match. But I still kind of feel like this is an example of something that happens in indie wrestling, which is guys kind of get paid in their push. And so it's kind of hard to book 3 guys like Special K and then tell them to come out and be like, the whole reason you come out tonight is basically to get squashed in 3 minutes. it's kind of hard to tell guys that when they're already not working for much money or any money in some cases. But at the same time, if I was booking this, I probably would have, especially knowing that these guys are going to wrestle later, and knowing it's their debut, I would have had them just crush them in 3 or 4 minutes. Instead, we actually get a fair bit of Special K offense. But again, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal.
I think also the Ring of Honor concept is, I think the idea, especially at the time, was that guys don't necessarily get over as much by winning as they do get over by having good matches. So having a competitive match is more important than looking dominant. I could sort of see that being the mindset.
It's another funny thing I noticed was, did you notice that there's a bit of a difference in how this whole name thing is sold, because the idea is supposed to be Generation Next is the name of the show and the kind of the gimmick of the show, and then Alex Shelley and the other three guys come in and just kind of impromptu, without anyone knowing, steal the name of the show for themselves and be like, no, the show isn't Generation Next, like we're Generation Next right here. And Gabe on commentary during this match says he acts pretty confused. He's like, I guess this new faction is called Generation Next. But yet by the time the match is over, the ring announcer is already like announcing them as Generation Next. Like it's not like, we don't know who to call these people. It's like, no, everyone clearly knows this is Generation Next.
Yeah, they're just everyone's just right on board with it. Like, all right, hey, we'll do it. Well, I guess that makes it a little different than like the NWO, where they're just actively against it. Like, this is like, okay, well, you're a new group, we'll call you what you want. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, that's another thing. Oh, sorry, go on.
Now, I was going to say, I wonder if the match would have gotten over more, though, if instead of Special K, their opponents were actually the Ring Crew Express. Because the crowd really was hungry for the Ring Crew Express, and they were more over than really any of these guys at the beginning.
It would have changed the dynamic, because obviously I think the crowd was really excited to see these guys getting a push, Generation Next, and they were cheering them even when they were clearly trying to be heels on this night, especially when you look at stuff like, at least at some points, like Alex Shelley, even early on, where he's like, we don't need you fans to decide our future. It's like the fans were cheering. They were like, yay, yeah, you don't, you're great. But I think one of the few acts on this show that could have gotten like heel heat from Generation Next would have been the Ring Crew Express, because they're so beloved at this point and they're so sympathetic as underdog baby faces. I think they probably could have gotten a few boos if they really wanted them, if they had like beat down the Ring Crew Express.
And they probably could have had a, like more of a better traditional match in terms of like getting heat on the Ring Crew Express and stuff.
Yeah. After the match, Alex Shelley gets on the mic again and he says Special K doesn't have a real wrestler in their group. Hydro gets really offended from hearing this. He jumps in the ring. He gets in Shelley's face, and we get a big Hydro chant, actually. Shelley says, let's do the damn thing. And we get our second impromptu match on the show, because Alex Shelley defeats Hydro in 7 minutes, 31 seconds, when he made him submit to the Border City stretch. I thought this match was kind of weird, Matt. It wasn't bad at all, but it's mostly on the match. This definitely was not a match like a lot of times in Ring of Honor or Indies. You can tell when it's guys just trying to make a new star in one night. This was clearly not that, and probably Alex Shelley in the back of his mind had the knowledge that he was going to be involved in a much longer match later in the night. But this was mostly on the match, and it was mostly Shelley dominating. I felt like it kind of flipped from the last match, where I felt like Special K got a bit too much offense. I thought for a match where Hydro basically made the challenge and was standing up for himself, it was on defense probably like 80-90% of this match. So I felt like this is, in my opinion, this was the match where it probably could have been closer to on 50-50. And it's mostly just Shelley putting Hydro through a series of his innovative, kind of cool looking, unique submissions, and Hydro getting an occasional comeback, and then Shelley winning clean with the Border City stretch. Not a bad match, but just kind of not what I would have expected going in. But again, it's interesting. This is another period where you can see it's interesting that, Gabe is pushing not just Generation Next. Those aren't the only four young guys he's pushing at the same time. He's got guys like Hydro that are on kind of parallel roads in terms of push at this point. Oh, what did you think about the match?
I think I liked it a little bit more than you did. I liked it definitely more than the opener. I thought it was more of an actual match. You're right that it was mostly Shelley dominating, but this is sort of the beginning of Hydro breaking out, just his willingness to kind of stand up to somebody. And a lot of the match was that Shelley was dominating, but Hydro just wouldn't back down, and he would do some cool moves too. And obviously, Shelley ended up winning with the Shell Shock and the Border City stretch, but it sort of gets Hydro out there as sort of somebody who stands out from the rest of Generation Next, and I mean from the rest of Special K, and they still take a few shows to complete that transition. I think he has a big match on a couple shows from now, and then he finally drops Special K after not too long from now. So I think this is just the beginning of a build for Hydro, whereas they're trying to do it sort of all at once for Generation Next. So it makes sense that they're just a little bit ahead of him, but he's starting to stand out. So I thought this whole opening segment, even if the matches weren't super great, I thought it was really good. I thought that it did a good job of establishing a number of different things, and I think it worked for the audience too.
Me too. Yeah, it felt different. It felt fresh, and also it felt exciting. It felt like something big was happening. That guys were on their way up, and what makes all the difference with Generation Next, something that I've been thinking about when I was knowing we were going to do the show, is that in a sense he didn't do the Generation Next angle, but Gabe tried to push that new crop of guys in 2003, where that first batch of guys in Ring of Honor that really led it to its first success in 2002, guys like Low Ki, Bryan Danielson, as they weren't going to be around as much or in some cases at all. You needed to keep obviously replenishing the next generation. And if you look at the next batch of guys Gabe had to book and they gave pushes to, it was like Matt Stryker, John Walters, guys like that. And it just weren't, I hate picking on those guys because none of them are bad wrestlers, but they just weren't the right horses. They're not guys that fans are going to accept at a main event. This is a guy that's going to get me to buy a DVD level. And I think one of the things that really works for Generation Next, more than the angle tonight, which I think was done well, but works even more, is that you have a group where all four of these guys are the right horses, in my opinion. And I'm not Gabe talking about BJ Whitmer being like a horse. These are the good horses. And they all bring something a little bit different to the table, and they're all, they all still have careers to this day. Even Alex Shelley just made a recent comeback. So
this, honestly, that should have been the name of their stable, the Good Horses.
Yeah,
but
the new four horsemen, the good horsies,
the good horses. It's interesting though, because the two most successful members of that group, at least in ROH, because clearly things change over time, but in ROH, it was Aries and Strong, right? And the guys in that group that had actually gotten kind of the slow introduction to this moment and built up were Shelley and Evans. And Aries and Strong, kind of, if you were just watching ROH, they just kind of showed up out of nowhere and got this huge push. So it really showed a lot of faith from Gabe that really, these guys were not part of his shows at all. He didn't really give them like this whole like kind of slow burn, like trial and error kind of thing. They were just in a couple of like pre-show matches, and then all of a sudden they were main eventers. It's not common, I don't think, for Gabe to do that, but clearly he was right in doing that because they sure did rise to the occasion, didn't they?
Well, it was also one of those moments that we've seen in wrestling history where sometimes the best gift you can give a promotion is having your back forced into a wall. Like there's been times in wrestling history where promotions, when big names leave, where you're kind of forced to get fully behind pushing younger guys. Not saying that Gabe wouldn't have otherwise, but like they had to make this work. Because right now they only had, in terms of their last batch of top stars, they had Joe, they had Punk, they had Homicide, and you can only put those guys in so many combinations against each other. And you had Danielson coming back sometimes this year, but not every show. And so losing AJ, losing Christopher Daniels, losing the other TNA guys that you might have had access to, these guys really did had to get over. I think this year would have been dramatically like worse. This turned out to be a very good year for Ring of Honor, but it would have been way worse if this didn't work. Like I feel like he was put in a position because it's where he had to do it, and that's really that's the thing that guys leaving can help with. Like if you look at mid '90s WWF, would Vince McMahon have pushed guys like Steve Austin as hard if he had like Hulk Hogan still around to fall back on, because we saw him a couple times previously in the early 90s try and get rid of Hogan and fall back on him. There's always this temptation to, when the second a push doesn't quite take, to go, oh, I'll bring back the guy that was a big star, but he's kind of giving us diminishing returns. When guys like AJ and Daniels leave, you had to make these guys work.
That is true. Although, I will say this. I don't want to underplay what ROH was going through at this time, because obviously it was an existential crisis. But as far as talent leaving, AJ and Daniels, they were big deals. But they still had Joe. They still had Danielson. They still had Punk. They still had Homicide. They would get Low-Ki back shortly. It's not like they were stripped of everybody. They still sort of had their Hulk Hogan. You know what I mean? I guess unless you wanted to say Low-Ki was the Hogan, but I kind of would say it was Samoa Joe at this point. So they didn't have to do it quite as extremely as they did. They replaced Styles and Daniels and then some, and I think it was a big improvement over what it was like even before they lost those guys, in terms of their roster and kind of their consistency up and down the card.
Oh yeah, like Generation Next coming in now, this marks, I think, like the best undercard depth Ring of Honor has had up to this point. Between them, Nigel starting to emerge, Jimmy Jacobs starting to emerge, like that's 6 guys right there that are genuinely entertaining and interesting, all on their way up. And then you got Hydro, who's going to start getting pushed, as Jay Lethal. This is the best kind of injection of undercard talent they've had.
Yeah, and like I said, they really lucked out with Aries and Strong, because they just popped them in there out of nowhere, basically, and they were over as big-time deals. And I will say this, I think we can unequivocally say this, Roderick Strong, way better looking in 2019 than he was in 2004. So good going, man.
This reminds, I actually had this in a note. I was going to save it till later, but I think this is the perfect time now, Matt, to counteract the toxic masculinity, the homophobia of a couple straight white men talking about Christopher Street Connection early on the show. I thought we'd counter it by having 2 other straight white men rank Generation Next in order of attractiveness, physical attractiveness, from best to worst. And I want to make clear, in my opinion, and I think you'll probably agree, there is not, you can't go wrong with either on any of them here. There's not a bad pick in the bunch.
Yes, but my question is, are we ranking them in terms of their 2004 appearance or in terms of their 2019 appearance?
Okay, how about we rank them in terms of whatever version you think was their best. So each one you can pick in your head.
Ooh.
What do you think their prime version? Like let's do the best of each of them. So I'll go first. I'll give you some time to think.
Okay.
I think Jack Evans is a beautiful boy. I think at his best, he's a handsome young fella. He would be fit right in on the cover of the Tiger Beat your older sister had under her bed. Jack Evans, number 1. Number 2, I think, would be modern Roderick Strong. I think I think you were a little hard on this Roderick Strong. He does have a lot of baby fat on him, but I would say, Roderick Strong nowadays looks like the jock at your school that you kind of liked, where Roderick Strong at this period looks like the jock at your school you kind of liked, maybe after his football career didn't go very well and he's leaning a bit too heavy on the Cheetos. But even then, not an unattractive man. I think number 3 would be Alex Shelley. I think he's a good looking guy. And 4 would be Austin Aries. And that might be controversial. I think Austin Aries is a good looking guy too. It's just someone has to be 4th, Austin, and it's you, unfortunately. But that's where I would rank them all time.
It's tough. First of all, Roderick Strong in 2004, I would say it's not the baby fat necessarily. His whole look was worse. Like the shades, he kind of had a little goatee going on there. I don't know, it just wasn't working for him. But
he also doesn't look great in the long trunks, like the full leg length things. I think he looks way better nowadays in the shorts.
Yeah, I would say Roderick Strong now, he looks kind of like a jock that you like. I'd say in 2004 he looks kind of like the jock that you definitely did not like and was probably a dick. which
maybe, actually, yeah.
which is a worthwhile look for a wrestler. Don't get me wrong. I would probably put it for number one, Roderick Strong now. I think he's just like a really classically good-looking guy with he's a very good body, like kind of a toned face, which is definitely not something he had back then. I think he looks really good. The rest of it is tough. I actually might go Alex Shelley for number two. Not his 2004 incarnation, but I think he's had a lot of like cool looks over the years, which is something that I might go for. The last two becomes tough for me.
This is the best podcast we've ever done.
Already. Yeah, just for this segment. Yeah, because Evans, so much of his career, he dressed in a way that just was not attractive, right? Like he's obviously an attractive guy. I feel like maybe in the past couple years, Aries and Evans have flipped for me. Whereas like maybe like 5 years ago, I would have put Aries ahead. I think now I'd probably put Evans ahead. But it's close. I mean, it's close for all of them. Except I think that Roderick Strong is a clear number. Roderick Strong now is a clear number one. But otherwise, it's super close.
Aries' facial choices in recent years, I feel like, have left something to be desired. But again, just my personal preference. And
right. Of course, a lot of this is a lot
that shouldn't account for much.
Also, a lot of it is, wrestlers, like, they choose their looks not always necessarily to be classically handsome. They want to look interesting for different reasons. So that also obviously has to be taken into account. I feel like if you just like took their like facial features and stuff, they're all on a very similar level looks wise.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think you can go wrong with any of them.
Mm-mm.
But
let's have a quadruple date.
But we had to answer we can't shy away from the important questions on this podcast, and I feel like that is something that had to be done. So
yeah, I mean, now let's hear your thought. Hashtag Generation Sex. No, just kidding. Not Generation Sex. Do not use that hashtag in any way related to us. How about Generation?
Snack.
I got it. I got it. I got it. Like the famous song, The Blank Generation. Hashtag The Rank Generation.
That was a rejected title for your original podcast, List 'em and Learn, which you can still listen to on thecubsfan.com. Great podcast.
Yes, thank you. It's an okay podcast. It's good when you're on it. Hashtag The Rank Generation. I'm sticking with that. Do it. Tell us. We want to know. Don't make Austin Aries mad at you.
Yeah, that's the one scary thing is you might incur. I could see him getting angry and oh well.
He's incredibly handsome, but he's used some interesting facial hair choices on purpose, cool choices. But if we're gonna have to rank, listen. Anyway. I'm gonna say this. I am very much not good looking. I am not judging.
That is bullshit.
But you guys are public figures, so I think you're leaving it open for us to rank. You're all beautiful men. I apologize sincerely if I have hurt any of your feelings.
Again, like that's the other thing. They were all good looking. Like, not that I don't think that Ring of Honor was appealing too much in the way of the women's demographic. Although honestly, I do think Jack Evans probably brought a couple women to shows. Like, wasn't there that show where that comes up in the future where a chair hits a girl in the crowd and the person Ring of Honor sent to like hang out with her and smooth it over was Jack Evans?
I did not remember that, but hey, makes sense. Dude's smooth.
Yeah. So again, even if you're not a promotion that's drawing a lot of women, having a couple handsome boys on your card, I guess, comes in handy for situations like, that very common situation where a chair hits a woman in the crowd. But
CM Punk also a noted ladies' man.
Yeah, although I feel like Punk probably appeals to a very specific woman. Like,
I don't know. If you go down the list of the wrestling women that he's dated, it's a pretty diverse array of women.
Yeah.
Like,
don't get it.
When he got into WWE, I bet you did not expect that he would start dating Maria Kanellis right away. That they did not seem to be a stylistic match at the time.
Not just a looks thing, but just like, how do their personalities match?
Well, that's what I meant. I think facially, CM Punk is good looking. But
no, he is.
Yeah.
but then wasn't Maria right around that time talking about like 5-star matches on Twitter? It was like, oh god, like Punk must be making her watch his matches with Samoa Joe right now.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, you just anyway. This is probably the longest digression we've ever had. So after the Hydro and Alex Shelley match,
Next episode of List 'em and Learn. The top 10 handsomest wrestlers. Honestly, I would love to do that.
Yeah,
Albert Ching would be very mad if I did that episode and didn't include him.
Honestly, you guys should do that. Should be the one you come out of retirement for. Make a Joe Gagne-esque return for the most important of topics. But
yes.
Anyway, after Hydro and Shelley wrestle, Evans laughs at Hydro, and the crowd chants for Shelley, who gets on the mic and says Hydro gave a good effort tonight, but his best wasn't good enough. Alex says Hydro opened his eyes tonight, though, and he thinks Hydro knows where he belongs. He offers his hand out to him, but Hydro ducks out of the ring, which creates, again, this is one of those funny moments where Hydro draws boos for rejecting the heel faction. Shelley says tonight is Generation Nexus night, and no one is going to stop them, so that's the end of the segment. But again, that's another nice little thing I think Gabe did with the booking of this, which is I think some people, like Vince Russo, for example, the temptation would be, we're doing this stable of young up-and-comers that's taking over. Let's have every single up-and-comer join the stable. And I like that Gabe was like, no, like I can push more young guys at once, and they don't all have to be in this stable. Like Hydro doesn't have to be a part of it.
Yes,
he'll still get a push. We don't have to, they can stand apart, which again, I think is a very wise decision.
Right. No, the fact that they made Generation Next a relatively small group while it was most relevant, I think was very helpful to it being successful.
It never got diluted.
Right.
Next up, we have Danny Daniels, Masada, and Trent Acid defeating the Carnage crew of DeVito, Justin Credible, and Loke in 634 when Acid pinned Loke after hitting a Yakuza kick. Now, you might wonder, before I throw it to you, Matt, if you're listening at home, you might wonder, hey, isn't Masada part of the Carnage crew? Well, the match starts with a very kind of weird resolution to an angle because at first we see all 4 Carnage crew members enter, and then we see Danny Daniels and Trent enter, and as we're watching their entrance, mid-entrance, the camera cuts to Loke mid-taking a bump for Masada. We don't see what Masada did, we just see the aftermath, and we see DeVito getting mad at Masada. So yes, after all these shows, all these months of who shit in the Carnage crew's bags, the cameraman misses the turn. Gabe has to tell us during the match on commentary that it was Masada and Danny Daniels that crapped in the Carnage crew's bags, and that Masada has betrayed the Carnage crew. So,
but also, don't they have a hard camera? Like, this is what I don't understand. Like, it wasn't just the camera person missing it; they clearly chose not to show it in editing.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Like, literally, we're seeing, like, when the camera cuts, we see not the hard cam, but like a handheld cam at ringside. We see basically Loke in the middle of taking a bump for Masada. And it's clear that Masada's attacked him, but we don't get to see it happen.
Here's another thing. This is like supposed to be a big angle. They built it up. There's a big turn. And they don't even have, like, a promo? Like, no one says anything? It's just, like it's all explained on commentary? Like, what?
Yeah, you would expect a mic work where it's like, both teams come out and then the Carnage crew get on the mic and like, well, who is it, Trent? Who did it? And then, maybe Masada jumps them from behind. But instead, there's like no asking or anything. Like Masada's plan was just to attack them while the other entrance was happening. It was just such a weird thing. But then we get a match out of it. What did you think about this match? Another short match, obviously, because they've got longer matches coming up. But what'd you think about this match?
Well, the angle, I thought, overrides the match. So, like, the way it's... First of all, what was the match supposed to be? Like, did we ever get clear on that? Like, before this
turn? This was supposed to be the Carnage crew versus
Danny Daniels and Trent, but then which Carnage crew? Like, I don't know. I guess they're just like, well, we don't even need to think about that. But what happens is, Daniels... So Masada attacks Loke... And then DeVito he walks up to Masada, no mic, and he just goes, "Did you fucking shit in my bag?" Like, and it's just like, first of all, even if he didn't, he just attacked Loke. Isn't that worse? Like literally beating someone up is worse than pooping somewhere. Like, so it's like your reaction is just wait. Forget about the thing you did just now. Did you do that thing 2 months ago? Um,
Did you punching my best friend in the face mean you shit in our bag months ago?
yeah, and I don't know if like Masada said yeah or anything like that, but they have this match. Um, and so Acid, he's wearing jorts and has a towel hanging out of his back pocket, so he fits right in this match. And everyone is so shocked that they decide to have a traditional six-man tag team match and get on the aprons and everything. That's your general reaction to a betrayal of epic proportions. And Gabe notes like, okay, well, he's very smart. He looks at Daniels and he looks at Masada. And he's like, they're wearing that Jinx clothing that the Carnage crew usually wears. He has to bring that one up. I heard that clothing was very controversial, by the way.
I felt for Gabe because he basically had to do like the entire turn on commentary during the match. Like,
but why would you feel for Gabe? He could have just explained, just had the angle done however he wanted. And he was like, oh, I guess there's been too much mic work already? I don't know.
Okay, I felt bad for Gabe, the commentator, who in my mind is a separate. I felt
Chris Lovey.
Chris Lovey,
yeah,
not for Gabe Sapolsky.
yeah. Then, of course, but he also asked to explain. He's like, "Why is this show in a tent?" Well, he's like, "Well, this is literally what he says. There's this war going on in Iraq. I'm sure many of you are aware of. Now, for anyone young listening to this, saying there's this war in Iraq that many of you are aware of is like saying." There's this guy, he's Donald Trump. I think some of you might have heard about him. He's this thing called the President of the United States. I don't know. A few of you might know about that whole thing. Like, that's basically what... In 2004, this was like the most talked about thing in the Western Hemisphere, was the Iraq War. And the way he says it is like, yeah, there's it's this weird thing happening. I don't know. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. Sorry, go ahead.
Go on. No,
I was going to say, so the booking is very silly. But you can't say this is dull, right? Loke has some interesting offense, but I think the match is pretty sloppy. Masada, he no-sells the Saito suplex and takes down Loke. Then he breaks up a spike pile driver with a chair. He beats up DeVito's leg with a chair, and then Acid hits a Yakuza kick for the win. So for some reason, Acid got the win in this match. I don't know what's going on. So this match was not good. But this whole thing was not boring. I think this whole start to the show has been extremely unique.
Yeah, everything's kind of impromptu on the fly. But one thing that I thought this match was, again, another in terms of action, like you said, average. There was some interesting stuff, but also some sloppiness. But the thing, DeVito hit his nice big fat guy drop kick, which he gets really good height on for a guy his size. I always appreciate that. The one thing though that I felt was a bit weird watching this match, and I think you kind of touched on it earlier, is that you have this huge betrayal, and we've seen the Carnage crew have so many like hardcore matches in there where they just brawl with guys who they hate because they're got weird gimmicks. That's the crime they've done. And here's a match where this months-long storyline gets finished. There's this incredible betrayal, and most of the match has Loke and DeVito just calmly standing on the apron watching, Just Incredible play face in peril. And I realize that's probably just the way they wanted to work the match, and that's very generous of Just Incredible as the veteran to be the guy who takes the beating for most of the match. But it was just a weird visual after seeing so many, Carnage crew brawls and fiery promos for them, as you said earlier, just to do a very orderly six-man tag where they're just like, yeah, well, this guy just stabbed us in the back, but we'll just take our turn. We'll follow the rules. We'll wait for a tag. Like, that was a bit of a weird visual. This was like the one time they really paid attention to the rules. But yeah, other than that, average match at best. And yeah, I never felt older watching this old Ring of Honor than hearing about the Iraq War. Like 15 years ago, that's something.
So you're aware of it?
Yeah, definitely. It is surreal to think back that like 15 years ago, a Ring of Honor show was diverted because a National Guard army had to be hold ammunition for a in progress war. Like, just like it makes you worry about what's going to be 15 years from now. Like, will we be doing some other retro podcast? We'll be like, oh, remember when we talked about, like 2019 AEW and everything was fine, and now, where every day our life is a war for water, and like.
Well, it's not like everything is so great now.
No, it isn't, but it's weird to think that 15 years ago there was a war that was like preempting, like forcing indie wrestling shows into tents. It's a weird time capsule that maybe isn't altogether pleasant to think about. But
no, you're right. Everything is fucked. But my point is just, things are still fucked. That was my bigger point.
No, agreed. Through the years, everything is always fucked. And also we rank handsome people. But next we're getting the start of a Jimmy Rave, John Walters match, one that Gabe says is a must-win for Rave. So this is another angle they were getting into around this time, which is the idea that Rave hasn't done really well in Ring of Honor win-loss-wise, and if he doesn't start winning, he's basically done. Gabe, in the commentary at this moment, he kind of had a bit of ambiguity. Ambiguity, yes, sorry. Had a brain lock there. But being like, well, this could be the end for him. But later when they were talking about it, they made it sound like, no, if he had lost this match tonight, he would have been gone for good. But that doesn't come up because right when the bell rings, Generation Next makes their way to the ring again. Alex Shelley grabs the mic again, and he says, timeout, flag on the play. Shelley says that Generation X wants both Walters and Rave spots. They're not going to climb the ladder. They're going to take the rungs out underneath them, which I thought was one of those lines that's pretty clever until then you kind of think about, like, you're ruining a ladder. Like, you're both not getting to the top then. Like, you're bringing them down to your level instead of ascending higher, but it still sounds cool when you don't think about the meaning of it. The rest of Generation Next attack Walters and Rave from behind, and in kind of an awkward moment, Shelley has to stall way too long, like for his, like, where the idea is the rest of Generation Next sneak attacks Walters and Rave while Shelley's talking on the mic, and it's clear that Shelley's like waiting and waiting for this moment he's expecting to come sooner. But anyway, they have the beat down. Walters gets taken out with a big pile driver, and he sells his neck. And then the Generation Next leaves the ring, and then we cut right next to the start of the next match. Matt, before we get into that, what'd you think about any thoughts about this little angle?
I think, like, as of this moment, it doesn't really say much, except these are a good two guys to go after, in terms of representing the old guard of the ROH mid-card. Even though, obviously, this timeline is so short, John Walters has been in ROH for a year at this point, but he's still the old guard because ROH has only been around for a little over 2 years. If only Matt Stryker was there, but because he would probably be the most symbolic person to go after, right?
We'll get to him on another show, but no, that's actually a really great point, which I didn't think about, which is, that on this show, they're also doing another thing that's different than some of these invasion angles. They're not going after the top guys. They're going after mid-card guys with the idea is, like, we're getting spots tonight. Like, they're not trying to take over the company tonight. They're going after, Jimmy Rave and Special K and the Ring Crew Express. They're going after just the lowest kind of to mid-tier guys. They're picking them off.
Right, they want to control the ROH mid-card, which, interesting goal. But they succeed at it. So, to be continued.
So that leads us we get finally a ring of one of the Generation Next branded matches, the one that did not get canceled. Nigel McGuinness defeated Jimmy Jacobs in 9:22 when he made him submit to some armbar variation. I don't know what to call it. It's around this time he was trying to adopt this as a finisher for Ring of Honor. Obviously, he would find things that would be much more popular that he would stick with, but he was using it at this time. I thought this is, again, I'm saying a lot of matches are middle of the road. I bet you probably like this a bit more. I mean, I thought this was solid, but not, 2 3/4, maybe 3 if I'm being real generous, but probably 2 3/4 stars. I thought it was a little slow in the first half. There was a lot of Nigel working over Jimmy's arm with stuff like standing wrist locks. And it was fine work, but the problem for me was it allowed me to focus on the commentary. And the commentary actually really irritated me for this match because it's something that they've been doing recently, but they really go into here, which is they completely shit all over Jimmy Jacobs and the Huss gimmick. They constantly compare him to Bruiser Brody. They just and it's shitty because the Huss gimmick consistently, every show gets really over with the crowd almost immediately. And Jimmy Jacobs, even though he does comedy spots, and yes, there's comedy in the early minutes of this match where Nigel isn't taking him seriously and he pulls Jimmy's headband over his eyes. But in every match Jimmy wrestles in Ring of Honor, he doesn't wrestle at like a complete comedy thing. By the end, he's trading big near falls and doing serious moves and things like that. So the idea that every time he wrestles in this point of his career, that the commentary is basically shitting on him, half shitting on him, and laughing at him and treating him like he's just the complete comedy when he's actually working as a serious like wrestler who's, trading big moves with guys you're pushing. That's the thing. It kind of distracted me from the match. I feel like the rest, as the match goes on, it gets bigger and bigger. We get to see maybe one of the first instances of Nigel doing the headstand fake out spot and the Tower of London. The crowd loves those spots immediately. Jimmy Jacobs does a rope walk chop, which was kind of neat. So I thought this was a fairly enjoyable match, but nothing special. I feel like these two could have a better match with each other, and I just really didn't like the commentary.
You're right that I liked it more than you did. I think, yeah, of course they could have a better match with each other, but I don't think their point was to have necessarily the best match. This was a short mid-card match, but I thought the energy was really good, and I thought the psychology was solid. I agree with you about the commentary. I especially thought it seemed like Nolte, I don't know, it seemed like he was offended by Jacobs' Brody shtick. Did you get that vibe at all?
Yeah, he keeps, Mark at one point goes, I know Bruiser Brody, and you, sir, are no Bruiser Brody. And it's like another timely, I don't mean to pick on Mark Nolte because overall he wasn't terrible on commentary compared to some of the people we've heard, but such a dated reference.
Well, he actually literally says, like the great Senator Lloyd Benson once said. It's like, could you imagine Lloyd Benson being mentioned on a wrestling show in 2004?
He might as well just to start referencing 80s Wendy's commercials. Like, when I look at Jimmy Jacobs, one thing that comes to mind, Chris, is where's the beef? Get it?
At least most people would probably know what he's talking about there.
Going to what you said about Mark, there's a point where Gabe tries to give the history like he usually does on commentary, where he's like, yeah, and recently Alex Shelley turned on Jimmy Jacobs, and it's clearly supposed to be a thing where we're supposed to feel sympathy for Jacobs, and Mark's reaction is basically like, well, can you blame him? And it's just like, Mark, that's not what you're supposed to be saying right now, I don't think. Gabe's leading you to think a different way, although to be fair, Gabe shares a little bit of blame here because he's clearly prompting Mark to rile him up about, at one point early on, he's like, Mark, how does Jimmy Jacobs compare to Bruiser Brody? And then, you're just setting Mark up, and then Mark says something maybe he compares with a step ladder and body armor. It's just like, ugh.
Yeah, if you're going to be, making fun of guys for being short, you should not be the ROH commentator, because it's not about how tall they are at all in ROH.
And that's the thing. If you're going to go after Jimmy Jacobs, there's a lot of guys at his height or comparable heights.
Yeah, right, exactly. A lot of guys. As far as the match, I agree with you. What stood out to me was that Nigel was kind of still rolling out a lot of his trademark offense, and the crowd loved it. And offense and defense, right? The headstand thing, like you said. Crowd loved that. And it was really cool. And the Tower of London and stuff. But I did like, the way that they worked over Jimmy's arm and the way Jimmy was selling the arm. Nolte even at one point calls it useless. And then the divorce cord into that arm submission, I thought that was a good ending. So I thought they did a good job in the role that they were in. So I would put it in the 3-star range, 3.25 even. I think that's fair, and I think that's exactly what it needed to be.
One thing I noticed too watching this match was in 2003 and even early 2004, we've seen a bunch of examples of guys they're getting pushed ahead of the crowd reaction. Guys like Matt Stryker, and even to a degree John Walters, where they're getting strong pushes and the crowd reaction to them isn't quite as strong often as the push. This was an example of I felt like Nigel was ahead of the push tonight. He's in a solid mid-card match, and clearly he's on his way up, but the crowd was really into him. I felt like even before he really wowed them with some of the stuff like the Tower of London, it felt like this crowd is ready to see Nigel do bigger things. You don't have to convince them, they're excited for Nigel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even I was excited for Nigel. I thought he was just really seemed like a guy who was on the move.
Yeah, and again, it's so much easier to push a guy when like the crowd's leading you and you're not leading the crowd, where you don't have to convince them. It just makes a world of difference. Um, Backstage in an echoey stairwell, we have the S to the S to the P, Sugar Sean Price. He's interviewing Homicide and Julius Smokes. Smokes rambles on as Smokes does, and then Homicide asks Julius if he knows Sean. Sean, in a really weird whiny fashion, is like, "Yeah, I know Smokes." Like he just kind of whines about it, like in a really defensive way that makes him look not befitting a interviewer and official ROH employee. Price then says Homicide has to be pumped up tonight, to which Homicide just flies off the handle and gets angry. He grabs Price, he pushes him against a wall, and Sean flees. I wrote in my notes, top-notch interviewer. And yeah, tonight is going to be a night where a lot of interviewers getting not much in the way of results.
Yeah, the most important stuff on the mic takes place when guys are not being interviewed, but just talking on their own.
Yeah. And that brings us to the Ring of Honor Tag Team title, no disqualification match. The Second City Saints of CM Punk and Colt Cabana successfully defend the titles, defeating the Prophecy of BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff in 19 minutes and 19 seconds when Punk pinned Whitmer after hitting the Pepsi plunge. So obviously this is a rematch of their match they had the very last show at Round Robin Challenge 3. I recall, while not thinking the match was amazing, liking that match, I think a bit more than you. What did you think about this, since they got basically, I would say, probably, a little more than double the time here and a no DQ stip?
Okay, so first of all, did they announce no DQ on the ring announcer, or was it just on the commentary? The reason I ask this is because the first part of this match did not seem like it was a no DQ match to me. And even at certain points, you would see, like, CM Punk was choking Moff on the ropes, and the referee was counting. So did the referee forget this was no DQ, or did they retroactively say this was no DQ? Did you notice?
I didn't notice. And the weird thing Ring of Honor would do at some points on these shows, and I forget if they did it for this, but I think they did it for the main event tonight, is they would have Game One commentary say, this isn't no DQ, but it's relaxed rules because this grudge, we want a winner. And so they started really blurring the lines here, where they want to act like they still had rules, but a lot of times they would just say stuff like that.
Right, yeah. I was confusing to me. As far as the match, I thought the early part, I was kind of thrown off because it was hard to tell who was supposed to be the faces and the heels at first. Like, the announcers were treating them both like heels. It was hard to tell who the crowd was behind, but then at a certain point, like, Moff got the crowd clapping for Whitmer, so I guess the Prophecy were the faces. There was some cool stuff. They were doing stuff where, like, Cabana was holding BJ on top of him, like, holding his arms, exposing his midsection, and then, like, Punk was able to attack him that way. I thought that was interesting. They were working on Whitmer's back for a while, and then, like, Punk went for this drop kick on Whitmer, and Whitmer moved, and Punk went through the ropes all the way to the floor, which was cool. And then Moff got in, kind of ran wild. Eventually, they did stereo topes, the Prophecy did, to the floor, and then they were fighting on the outside. They were in, like, the crowd, and you could see they were fighting on grass and stuff because they were in the backyard. The downside of this was that at a certain point, they cut away from something that you could see to a shot of complete darkness until the spotlight found the wrestlers. Did you notice this? That they literally cut to black at one point?
Yeah, it was really black, and then occasionally the spotlight's glare, it would go from being complete darkness to, like, overwhelming glare.
Yeah, wonderful production values on this show. So it was hard to see the action too well, but you could tell they're throwing each other on lots of chairs. And then they get back in the ring, Punk goes for the Shining Wizard for 2, and then Punk goes for something off the top, but Moff shoves him off the turnbuckle all the way to the guardrail on the floor, and the crowd really got into that and chanted, holy shit. At this point, the crowd is into it. There's a superplex by Whitmer on Cabana, and then Punk and Moff simultaneously hit moves on their opponents, so, like, Punk comes off with a leg drop, and Moff comes off with a headbutt, so that was kind of cool. And at this point, the crowd's really into it. Punk rolls down his knee pad, but Moff takes him out, and Punk goes for the Pepsi plunge, but Moff and Cabana and, like, all 4 of them are fighting on the top. And then Cabana falls to the floor, and Moff falls through a ringside table, and then Punk hits the Pepsi plunge for the win. So I thought, like, the last half of the match or maybe the last third even was good. Like the crowd was into it. I thought it was like pretty good even by this. Like if you want to compare it to that match from Round Robin Challenge, I thought it was kind of like that. I thought there was something kind of off about the first third of the match and the middle third. I don't know. You couldn't really see it. So all in all, I would say decent. I thought it was decent, and the guys worked really hard, and the ending was entertaining.
Yeah, I would describe this as like good, but kind of disappointing still. Because again, for me, I liked what they did in the short amount of time they had at Round Robin Challenge 3. And here they had way more time and a no DQ stip to play with. And I felt like it wasn't really better. And you went over some of the problems with the face heel stuff being confusing at first, and especially the crowd stuff. And I realized that the 10th thing was they only had a few days notice on, but then maybe don't do a crowd brawl spot. If you can't guarantee that fans can see it, because there's nothing worse watching indie wrestling than when guys decide to have an extended crowd brawling section and you don't have like a good spotlight set up and you just can't see anything. Because I'm sure it's really fun for like the 60 people in that section of the building. For everybody else that's watching it at home and even in the building, it's not fun. I thought one problem with this match was that apart from the extended crowd brawl and a couple swings of some chairs, there wasn't that much in this match. There wasn't really anything in this match that you wouldn't see in a regular Ring of Honor match. Like, especially most of the match, a lot of it or a good chunk of it was Punk and Cabana doing the old school, like isolate somebody, beat down, control the match. It wasn't, I don't know, it didn't quite fit my expectations for a no DQ match. And in fact, I would say that in some ways, like the relaxed rules main event we're getting later tonight is more violent than this no DQ match.
Oh yeah, much. I mean, fork stabbing. Hello.
So it's one of those things where I think they said the stip sets the bar kind of higher than they hit in terms of things like that. Also, Dan Moff takes a bump through the table right off the turnbuckle to set up the finish of the match where Punk does the Pepsi plunge, and the problem is the camera angle. You barely see him go through the table. It's like from the opposite end of the ring. And
I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known unless the announcers had said so.
Yeah, so it's much like the Carnage Crew angle. It's another thing where one of these big highlight things you really should see, you really don't get to see. You barely are. You have a faint awareness of it. And but the match itself, it was not. I feel like I'm sounding too down. It was not a bad match, and those two Punk spots you described, especially the where he tries to do the corner dropkick and flies through the ropes at speed, feet first, through the ropes to the floor. That was a crazy Punk bump, and he also takes that bump off the top that you said to the guardrail. And between those two spots and the spot on the last show where he has to take the bump from the ring over the top rope to the floor without touching the floor of the apron, Punk was taking some pretty crazy bumps at this point in his career. Like, he's not Cactus Jack, but some pretty crazy bumps. And it's an interesting couple shows to see him do that. And it's solid. I feel like I'm being too hard on it, yet if you also ask me, hey, do you want to go back and watch this match again? I would say no. So maybe I'm not being hard on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really do think the ending sequence was good. And I thought the crowd really came alive for it. And I think that brings the match up a lot compared to maybe how it was going before that.
So after the match, we join Gary Michael Capetta backstage. He's not in a stairwell. He's not Sugar Sean Price. He gets the good interviews where you don't have to be stuck in a stairwell. And
it's funny. So it's funny because like backstage in this case is like inside the building that the fans are not allowed in, which I think is an interesting dynamic here. Backstage just means inside.
Yeah, that's the weird. Yeah, you're right. Huh. Okay, that's weird. So Gary's joined by a bummed out Special K. It's a very short segment. They're sad. They're sad that they keep losing. Dixie says party's over. So yeah, Special K. It looks like a change for them, and they would get a change, but really they're kind of their heyday is done now. They're kind of lost at sea here.
Yes, that is true. The golden age of Special K is absolutely over. Spoiler alert: it does not come back in any way, shape, or form close to what it was before.
Yeah. Next, we join Sean Price outside the Prophecies locker room. He tries to enter it to find a scoop about what's going on with them, but Allison Danger yells at him and doesn't even let him get in through the door. And I wrote in my notes, the crack Ring of Honor reporting team continues their night of top-notch investigative journalism. So, yeah.
The Ring of Honor is a serious promotion. They never make their announcers seem very competent at any point during this era.
Something we probably should have counted at the start would be the number of times Ring of Honor interviewers try to get someone to answer any of their questions, and the segment ends with them getting no answers or kicked out of a room. Like, it's got to be double digits at this point.
I would say so, yes.
Which, that can happen some of the time, but it seems like here it happens more often than not by far. Like, it's a wonderful treat when they do get an answer. But next up was the Briscoes, Jay and Mark Briscoe, defeating the Outcast Killers of Diablo Santiago and Oman Tortuga. They're scored to the ring by Josh Daniels and Prince Nana, part of the Embassy. It ends in 4:41. We get a graphic for this match that says that there is no commentary due to technical difficulties. I don't know what the technical difficulties were.
Seriously, what the fuck? Like, how is that a thing?
I don't know. Maybe I don't. When the commentary is done in post production, I don't know what happened. They clearly
it worked for every other match.
I wonder if they were literally just like, you know what, we can't be bothered. Like, I don't care.
It could be. Well, do you remember that something similar happened at the Crowning a Champion show, where the opening match with Tony Mamaluke against somebody. And that match had no, or maybe it was Michael. I don't even remember. But the opening match had no commentary either, just randomly. And the announcers never acknowledge it. So it's like, yeah, it was something that happened in post. I don't know. So weird.
Maybe it's literally as easy as like they forgot to press record or something, and then they were like, you know what, it's not worth it.
Mark Nolte already flew home. We can't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. So this match, there's not much to say. The Outcast Killers got a fair bit of, I would probably say they got like a quarter of the offense here. This still felt like a squash, though, because the Briscoes were just hitting big bombs when they were taking out the Outcast Killers. I felt this was a match that kind of showed you why the Outcast Killers are where they were in the totem pole of indie wrestling, because they did try some innovative little moves, but I felt like there was just some sloppiness here, and they were working, obviously one of the better tag teams on the scene at this point. There was a slight bit of communication issues between one of the Killers and Mark Briscoe at one point, where it seemed like they didn't know what to do, and they just kind of stood awkwardly and then redid what they were planning on doing. I will say Diablo Santiago took one of the nastier looking Falcon arrows I've ever seen. Usually when someone takes the Falcon arrow, they take it like, like a high angle slam, where on this one, Diablo basically took like a vertical drop almost straight down and just kind of turned it on his side at the last second. So if he had, taken that a bit higher and didn't turn, that could have been really ugly. It looked pretty nasty. But yeah, there's not much to this match. Do you have anything else to say about it?
I guess the one thing is, like, it does seem like the Outcast Killers were acting a little bit bolder now that Nana was in their corner. Like, the way they started the match was Tortuga kept psyching Jay out of like a test of strength, and then slapped him, which I was definitely like something that maybe the previous Outcast Killers wouldn't have done. So I think like that's really it. And like you said, they try to do some interesting moves, but the moves are so indie. Like a double team hip toss, they flipped them all the way around onto their stomach. But it wasn't bad. I guess that was kind of cool. But otherwise, yeah, it's basically what you said. As far as squash matches go, I thought this was not bad at all.
And one other thing I want to mention, I just realized I forgot. This is related to the last match, the no DQ tag title match. This is just a live note from Mike Johnson. I might as well throw it in there. He wrote about that match. The actual brawl was really stiff and brutal, with the workers taking bumps and swinging chairs Memphis style, but nearly caused a scene with fans who were being told to back up by security so that a spotlight could be used to showcase the wrestlers. Unfortunately, the problem with putting that theory into reality was there wasn't anywhere for those fans to go, since they were already trapped between the brawling workers, other fans rushing towards the brawl, and the stake lines that were holding the tent up. Although no one ended up hurt, the fans were rightfully upset as the prime concern seemed to be getting the spotlight on the workers, which should never be the case in that situation. Although nothing happened, in the future, Ring of Honor Security, which does a good job, would be well advised to use the old ECW mentality of having staffers surround the workers while in the crowd in order to prevent sight issues and for the security of all involved. Also, Matt, Mike Johnson said this was his favorite match of the night.
Well, hey, yeah, I mean, maybe live, there's something about crowd brawling if you're right there, I guess. But if you literally can't see it because of all these logistical issues that you just described, might make it a little bit worse on video.
Yeah, if you're one of the people in that section and you're not being crushed or killed or something, like, yeah, I can imagine it being the most exciting part of the match, but I would put probably at least a couple matches I'd enjoyed more that we're about to get to. So, but first, after the match, Prince Nana berates the Outcast Killers on the way to the back. The Briscoes start to leave as well, but then Generation Next comes out again.
By the way, I forgot one thing during the Jacobs versus McGuinness match. Right as the match was about to start, a fan yells out, "And here comes Alex Shelley!" But of course, he wasn't coming out. But just by that point in the night, they had the prediction of like what was going to happen. So I thought that was pretty funny.
I gotta remember there's a great other little crowd talk moment that I gotta get to in like after the next match that is a really good moment, at least to me. So anyway, Generation Next comes out. Alex Shelley gets on the mic. Here comes Alex Shelley, and he says they've already taken 2 spots tonight, and they're looking to take 2 more, and that the Briscoes can either give them over or have them taken from them. I thought that was kind of a weird thing because it's like the Briscoes just wrestled their match, so like how do they give them their spots? Like, do they have like a spot card in their pocket or something? Like, what do you want them to do at this point? Jay Briscoe grabs the mic. He asks who the fuck these 4 even are. Jay says he and his brother never back down from a fight. Shelley points out that they're outnumbered 4-2 when Walters and Jimmy Rave return to a surprisingly big pop. I felt like that, this actually earlier in the show angle worked out because the crowd was really excited to see them back. Walters gets on the mic and he says they all came to fight. He asks the crowd who wants to see an 8-man tag. We get another big pop. We get some actual rounds of handshakes, and the match is on. Generation Next of Alex Shelley, Austin Aries, Jack Evans, and Roderick Strong defeated Jimmy Rave, John Walters, and the Briscoes in 41 minutes, 21 seconds when Shelley made Walters submit to the Border City stretch. So yeah, this is kind of the match that this show is remembered for. This is the big showcase match. They get over 40 minutes. Matt, what'd you think about this match? I think we have a lot to say about this one. I'm just going to say, you and I think we have an agreement on something. We talked about a little about this before. So what are you going to say about this match?
Okay, well, first of all, Gabe at one point says this is the first match like this in ROH history. Does he mean a 8-man tag? Or like maybe a non-scramble rules 8-man tag? Clearly at the first anniversary show they had like, what was that, a 20-man tag? I don't even remember how many people were in that match. 10-man, 12-man, I don't even remember. Where there were 7 guys on each team. Anyway, point is, this is a traditional 8-man tag, which it is true you do not see much of in ROH. And they kind of have pairings early. Like, the Grave against Evans is one pairing. And let me see if I wrote down some of the different... Walters and Aries get like a segment. Strong, he's with Jay a lot of the time. Whenever Strong and Jay Briscoe are in the ring together, they just beat the crap out of each other. And I feel like their segments are kind of the highlights. And and Shelley and Mark also have some segments together. Of course, they mix and match a lot too, but those pairings are a lot of the early part of the match. I thought Nolte does a good job early because he breaks down how the Briscoes had a tough match against the Killers, compared to how they might have expected, but then 2 tough matches the prior week. It's good to remind the DVD viewer that Round Robin Challenge was only 1 week before this. I think that adds something. Obviously what you're looking for with a match like this is how the new group is doing together. And I feel like they didn't necessarily come on strong in terms of like working as a unit. You don't really see a lot of like double team or triple team or quadruple team stuff until a little bit later, even to the point where the announcers point that out. There's again, this is a 40-minute match, so there's a whole feeling out sequence that it feels like it lasts 20 minutes. It's fairly entertaining, but in terms of like the story of the match coming through, you really don't get it too much early. Like I said, the highlights for me in the early part were Strong and Jay Briscoe beating each other up. I thought that was cool. Eventually, you get some big moves, like Mark giving a big clothesline to Jack Evans, who does another flip bump. So many flip bumps. And Walters throws Jack from an electric chair position onto the Briscoes' knees, which, is a very Jack Evans bump to take. And I thought that was one of the highlights, honestly. A lot of spitting in faces. One thing I noticed, Jay spits his gum in Shelley's face. I believe at one point Roderick spits in the faces of the faces. Yeah. So the faces, they work over Jack Evans. They kind of brutalize him. The Briscoes do their double team sidewalk slam leg drop on him, and Gabe calls it. I don't know why I thought this was so funny. So they've done this before. It's like Jay hits a sidewalk slam, Mark hits a leg drop at the same time, and Gabe goes, "Nice leg." I just thought that was a funny way to call the move, but now I like to think that's actually the name of that move. That's the nice leg. But Evans does like a low blow, followed by a Pele kick, and he gets out, and Roderick tags in. Roderick takes over on Jay, and he works over Jay's legs. So at a certain point, I thought Jay's legs was going to be the target. Shelley works on the legs, and they kind of cut off the ring on Jay, but it doesn't last as long as I would thought. But Jay does do a good job because he sells an Irish whip. Like, he actually collapses on an Irish whip, which is good selling of the leg, which is why I don't understand why they just went right to tagging in Rave. So Rave gets in, he's a House of Fire, he fights them all off, and then he tags in Walters. And Walters ends up being the guy that they actually work over. They work on Walters' neck and back. So Strong does like a Moodalock, but he doesn't even try to bridge. He just like lies down on Walter's back. I don't know if I've ever seen that done before. Evans even does a neck submission on Walters, which I don't know. During this era, how many matches do you remember seeing where Evans does submission moves?
Yeah, it just felt like everyone had to do it. So Jack Evans was like, "Here's one of the 3 submissions I remember." Like,
yeah,
I'll grab on this.
But Walters gets a hot tag on Mark, and at this point, we're in like the 30-minute mark. I feel like the crowd is tired because Mark's tag does not get the pop that Rave's tag did about 10 minutes earlier. So they do the springboard doomsday device on Aries. Shelley gets a striker lock on Jay, so he's calling out his arch nemesis, Matt Striker. Rave cuts him off and gets the crossface on Shelley, and Shelley almost taps, but makes the ropes. Shelley hits a big running knee. Rave hits a big running knee on Shelley, and Strong runs in. And even Gabe mentions at this point the crowd has just given up on caring about the tag rules because I don't even remember who's legal at this point. But Walters does the Northern Lights on Aries. Evans breaks up the pin with a shooting star press, which is an interesting way to break up a pin. Strong does a back suplex on Rave. Mark breaks it up. That pin with a shooting star press. So there's another time someone done that. And so bodies are just lying everywhere. Jack hits a high angle back suplex on Mark, and Mark comes right back with the cutthroat driver. And Jay gets the Jay driller on Strong, but Aries immediately hits a 450 on Jay. Walters makes the save, and now the crowd's waking back up because they're doing all these moves. And then Walters hits a really scary botched Dominator off the middle rope on Aries. Do you remember this?
Yeah, there's a couple times I've seen John Walters get that Dominator where it's like he doesn't always seem quite comfortable with it, which is maybe he shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, he almost drops Aries on his head. And he doesn't, luckily. And Evans breaks up the pin. But Walters is still selling his neck, and Evans does a springboard 450 onto a pile, which leaves Shelley alone with Walters. And Shelley does a double boot to the back of Walters' neck and gets the Border City stretch. And Aries cuts Rave off with the Rings of Saturn, and Walters taps out. And so this match gets this insanely huge reaction. ROH chants, match of the year chants, everyone's going crazy. And when I first saw this match, I remember having a very similar reaction. Watching it now, they worked their butts off. They did so much cool stuff. It was a very good match. But I don't think it held together that well. I felt like there was some meandering points. The crowd was up and down because it went on a little too long. I thought with Walter's neck being such a focal point of the finish, they should have worked on it for longer. Instead, they had that whole segment where they were working on Jay's leg. I feel like the focus was just off at different points. I don't want to take anything away from the guys. It's very hard to pull off a 40-minute, 8-man tag like that where everything comes together. But that said, that's what they were trying to do. And they clearly succeeded at the time. I feel like it's one of the few matches we've watched where I can really strongly say I was a little disappointed in terms of what I expected, even though it was really good. And I don't quite think it holds up. That's fine. It's been 15 years, so not everything's going to hold up. But this match, I don't think quite does.
Yeah, I remember writing to you on Messenger after I watched this match, like something I've said on this podcast a bunch of times is that one thing I've learned from doing this rewatch for Through the Years is basically every great Ring of Honor match from 15 years ago has held up, in my opinion. It's as good or better than it was. Now, stuff on the undercard, maybe, that's the stuff that ages worse. But basically every match that is great, I've been not disappointed by revisiting it. This is the first match, just like you said, where I remembered it being great when I watched it at the time when it came out, and I was excited. And it doesn't age. It's not bad. I would say it's like I remember this as like a 4.5-star match. It would now I'd probably give it like 3.5. So. That doesn't seem like a huge deal, but that's the difference between remembering something as, oh, that was a great, one of the memorable matches of the year, to just like, oh, this falls in a sea of things that were good but kind of flawed. And yeah, you ran down a lot of the problems, which is I feel like the first 10 minutes of this match you could have chopped right off. It was just everyone working the mat, and I like mat wrestling, but it was just everyone trading off. It wasn't telling a story. They weren't really working over one guy in a way that paid off later in the match. In fact, it felt like they didn't realize until the final 10 minutes that they should work over Walter's neck, even though they had done that whole angle earlier in the show where they pile drove him and he was really selling his neck. It was like in the final 10 minutes they realized, oh, yeah, we should work over John's neck. And it just felt, the first 10 minutes felt like they were artificially lengthening the match. Like they knew that they had 40 minutes and this was a way to turn a 30-minute match into a 40-minute match, or even a 25-minute match into a 40-minute match. I also felt like it had one of those problems where there was a few times in this match where like Jack Evans would do a dive or some big spot would happen and you feel like, all right, this match is going to go from second gear to third gear, and it just goes right back to second gear again. Like, I feel like matches, I know Mojo, I've referenced this before in a shoot interview, he said his philosophy is a match should never go down. It should always stay at its level it's at or go up. I don't always agree with that. I think there are some exceptions to that, but I did feel like this was a match where it was like there was a couple times where just where you think it's going to really kick off, they kind of throttled it back down again. And that goes to what you were saying, which is it felt there wasn't a lot of teamwork. It felt like a lot of guys doing their own thing, each like your turn to show off what you can do, your turn to show off what you can do. There wasn't a lot of cohesion, but at the same time, these guys worked their ass off. Like you said, there was a lot of good moves. And again, it was 3.5 stars. It was a good match, but it just is not what my memory of this match was. I did not remember it being so kind of slow and not really holding together. But it's still, here's the thing, a match can be not what you remember and still be a huge match for those guys at the time, because that crowd, like you said, went nuts for it. They chanted as much after this match as they chanted after friggin' Low Key and Bryan Danielson in the early years of Ring of Honor. And yeah, it was the breakout match. I think that speaks to maybe, sometimes the standards change over time, but also how hungry people were in Ring of Honor for new talent and for this talent to break out. And I think in a different city, you wouldn't have gotten as good of a reaction. I think in a Dayton, maybe not, but I think in Philly, they were hungry for change and they got it here. And I felt kind of bad because I thought this match aged a little bit for us, because I know John Filipavich, who's a regular listener, and he's done a great ECW documentary, Barbed Wire City, among other things. He wrote us a nice email where he talked about some of his background with the show. And one thing he wrote, I'll just read it here, was, I do want to submit that the entire formation of Generation Next, the Special K match, the match with Lethal, and the setup for the 8-man tag was amazing stuff. The 8-man tag between Gen Next and Rave Walters and the Briscoes is one of the biggest hidden gems pre-2006 Golden Year, and I'd argue a top 10 match for the promotion if you limit it to tags of any type during the Gabe run. That's 41 minutes of bliss, both live in 2008 when I rewatched it, and the last time I saw it during the summer of 2014. 10-year reunion. Can't wait to see if you guys can still dig it or think it's aging poorly. And I really wish we had a better answer, but I do think it's not terrible. It's aged a little bit, I think. And
yeah, I mean, I think I like it probably a little more than you, but I definitely don't hold it in that rarefied air. It's just as far as pure match quality. As in terms of how successful it was, and did it get the job done, and is it historic and important and all that stuff? I think it is in rarefied air. It's one of the most important matches in ROH history, kind of low key, no pun intended. But just in terms of, if I'm just like judging it in a vacuum as a wrestling match, yeah, it's not at the level of some of the best ROH matches, I'm sorry to say.
And it's funny, I decided I was really going to go back on this one and look after I had written my review notes to see what other people thought about it at the time, and there was actually a more diverse opinion at the time than I remember. There were people that definitely were like, this is a match of the year contender, this is an amazing match, and there was people that were like more like what we were saying now. So then that's the other thing. I kind of remember this being universally loved, but actually there was definitely people back then who kind of feel the way we felt now. So
right, it's not like, I'm trying to think of like a comparison. Like, it's not like the night the line was crossed, like where it's like Shane Douglas and Sabu and Terry Funk, where at the time people were like, this is, one of the most amazing matches in American wrestling history. Things are just like, it's, it was new and old all combined, perfect, all. And then you watch it now and you're like, this is, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? You've seen that match, right? Like, yeah, it doesn't even seem like a good match now, really. Like, if you're just judging it through modern eyes, this is not like that. This was still really good.
When you watch this match, you can see, especially in the final 10 minutes, you can see why people were going nuts and thought this was an amazing match. I think if you rewatch, the night the line is crossed, it takes more of, you have to put yourself even further back. You have to do more mental work to go, well, for the time it was, it's harder to kind of see what people saw in it.
Right.
So looking at these old opinions, there was just one that I thought was interesting where, like I told you, there were people that really liked it, loved it back then, and there were people that kind of were more mixed on. I felt this was interesting where Wade Keller kind of goes both directions simultaneously. This was his review of the match. The opening 15 minutes were a bit tedious and mostly without long-term consequence, but it picked up from there and finished with a really hot 20 minutes of adrenaline rush action with big spots and innovative submissions. And then he gives it a rating 4.5 stars. So that was a bit interesting to me, where it's like, if you think the first 15 minutes of a 40-minute match is tedious, part of me wonders, like, can that match, obviously it can be whatever you want it to be, but a 4.5 star match is pretty damn high praise for a match where you go, almost half of this match was tedious and didn't really go anywhere.
Especially back then, where we thought the highest rating was 5 stars.
Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, 4.5, right in line with what Wade wrote. But in that day, you were half a star away from perfection. And he's like, first 15 minutes, not so good. Still great match. But still, big, like you said, you can't understate. This was the selling point of the show on DVD. I remember, no, it wasn't Homicide Joe, and it was a big, it was the breakout match and a great showcase for the 4 guys in this stable. So Just scrolling down.
A rousing success, whatever we think of it now.
I thought I just gotta say, I thought Jack Evans was fantastic as the shit stirrer. He is just talking a mile a minute on the apron, just talking shit to the ref, to the opponents at all times. He is just the best annoying prick here. And I don't know where it happened. Maybe that electric chair spot you mentioned earlier, but Jack Evans' back is marked up to shit after this match. Like just red marks, deep cut, not full cuts, but scrapes. So yeah, after the match, crowd chants ROH, then match of the year, then give them a standing ovation, followed by a thank you chant. So this was one of the bigger reactions for a match Ring of Honor crowds had given up to this point. Jack Evans turns to the camera and says, "At least they respect it." So he's being a heel, but he's kind of giving them props. Both teams shake hands as another loud ROH chant starts. And then it came time for a scheduled in-ring verbal confrontation between CM Punk and Ricky Steamboat. They couldn't have a match. They're having a verbal confrontation. Gary Michael Capetta introduces both men one at a time, and they each get traditional pro wrestling entrances with the lights being dimmed and their theme music being played. Matt, this is where the fan interaction part that I like, the line I like, happened, because one of my favorite things in indie wrestling is when the theme music ends, and then before the theme music for the next wrestler starts, there's complete silence, and then you hear someone very clearly say something. So in this not match, but verbal confrontation, after Punk's music plays, there's a small break, and you can clearly hear one girl in the crowd, very clear as day, say, "No, I like it. I like this song." And then it just goes on. And I like that you just catch that little bit of a conversation where someone's like going like defending CM Punk's AFI song in the well,
I like it too. If he ever comes back, I want to hear that be his entrance music.
Yeah, I mean it's a great theme for him. Great theme. I mean it's one of those themes where you kind of it needs to play out a bit. So maybe not great for some of today's TV wrestling product, but it works great for him here. One crazy fan gets into an intense shouting match with Punk at ringside. I believe he is the bald screaming fan we've referenced in the past. He tells Punk he thinks he's Steamboat's bitch, and Punk continually just tells him to be a man, almost daring him to attack him. Never happens.
He was the same guy, the same fan who was like, die, die at main event spectacles.
Yeah. Their feud continues, as does the Steamboat feud. When Steamboat and Punk are both in the ring, Capetta reminds them that this is going to be a verbal confrontation, not a physical one. The crowd chants, "Fuck 'em up, Steamboat, fuck 'em up." Punk gets the mic, and he talks about how everyone wants to be remembered long after they're gone for their accolades and achievements. Punk runs down Steamboat's career accolades, including his titles, his WrestleMania 3 match with Savage, his series of matches with Ric Flair, his matches with Steve Austin in the mid-90s, which didn't get as good a reaction as the Savage and the Flair ones. I feel like that should have gone first and not last. You can tell this is a 2004 show, Matt, because this immediately mentioning Austin prompts a bunch of what chants from the crowd. So that was a bit of a mistake from Punk. Punk says Steamboat has aged well. He couldn't tell that he was 115 years old when he saw him in New Jersey earlier this year. He then brings up Steamboat's bald spot, and Ricky kind of runs his hand over it when Punk says that, which made me go, "Ah," like he's like, "Oh, my bald spot." Steamboat gets on the mic and he calls Punk just CM. He's like, "Well, CM," which I thought was funny.
Yeah, he's been doing that. I think it's he's the only one who does that. Oh, actually, I think it's possible that Nolte has done that at certain points too. But it's a man above 50. They call him CM.
Well, Chick Magnet, Ricky says it took him over 20 years to build all those special moments, and on these Ring of Honor shows recently, Punk has been trying to capture that 20 years of history in one night. Ricky says that he's come to tell Punk to either shut up or put it up because he's come to fight him tonight. That gets a huge pop from the crowd. Punk takes off his jacket, and the crowd breaks out into another huge "fuck 'em up, Steamboat" chant. Punk then grabs the mic as the crowd switches up to a CM pussy chant. Punk says he could take everything Steamboat built in his 20-year career in a snap. He says he respects Steamboat, and the last thing he wants to do tonight is fight him. The crowd chants pussy, but then Punk offers Steamboat a handshake. At this point, Steamboat does a really great job of playing to the crowd and really milking the moment. Punk crosses his heart as he offers the hand. Steamboat eventually shakes. Punk immediately attacks him. Steamboat fires back with chops. Punk beats down Steamboat, and we get some vintage Steamboat selling, which someone might say overselling, but that's classic Steamboat. We'll maybe we can talk about that a little bit in a bit. I got a note on that. Steamboat even takes a Dan back rake from Punk. So Punk must have just loved being able to do like these classic like 80s spots like a back rake. Punk's offense, it's all easy to take stuff for Steamboat. He does chops, he does punches. Steamboat does another classic Ricky old school thing where he'll make these little mini comebacks during the beatdown, but he always gives Punk control right back. Like he'll throw a chop or two, but then he'll immediately just keep getting beaten down. He never makes the full comeback till near the end. Steamboat whips Punk into the ropes and then grabs him by the throat with both hands. He lifts him off his feet. He holds him for a good long time there before he throws him down to the mat, so he still had some strength. Steamboat then climbs to the top rope, and then Colt Cabana runs in. He crotches Ricky on the top rope. Colt then holds Steamboat down on the mat as Punk grabs the ring belt from ringside, and he recreates the classic Randy Savage angle where he comes down on Ricky's throat from the top rope with it. Refs rush in the ring to check on Ricky as Punk yells at Ricky that he took everything away from him just like that, like he said he would, like he said he could. Whitmer and Moff eventually run in, which chases Punk and Cabana out to ringside, and Punk celebrates and tells the cameraman that history repeats itself. So, in a way, this is just more of what we've been seeing with another little bit of escalation. But I thought this still was very entertaining, and I thought it came off really well. And again, it's Steamboat keeps doing more and more and more in these angles. What did you think?
Yeah, I would describe it as simple but very effective. Right? It was very straightforward, right? They didn't try to do anything fancy on the mic. They basically just told the story. They didn't really try to do anything fancy in the ring. They basically just told the story. You know, it was basically a simple wrestling match, and Steamboat did a great job, like you said. Punk did a great job. Everything was perfect. There wasn't anything nothing that you need to go out of your way to see or anything, but everything was done exactly the way it needed to, and it came across exactly the way it needed to continue to build this feud and get this issue and these characters over. So I thought it was incredibly effective. Great booking.
And the crowd ate it up, and it's impressive also that this Steamboat angle has been getting honest-to-goodness heel heat for CM Punk, and at a time where we're even on the same show with Generation Next, it's really hard in the indies, even by 2004, to get fans to boo someone if they're being really cool or if they're really talented. And, Punk's getting, that crowd was 80-20 or 90-10 against him, wanting Steamboat to kick his ass. So that's impressive in itself. And there's one note I have from The Observer. Someone gave a live feedback to Dave, and I kind of disagree with this, Matt. I want to hear what you have to say. I'll read it. Dave wrote, I got several comments from readers who saw the angle, he's referring to the Punk Steamboat one, saying that this was the first time that they needed to limit Steamboat's interaction because in the spots where he was selling, it was clear that he's no longer Steamboat as opposed to previously where he just did a couple of quick trademark moves as a tease and people went crazy. I was told a singles match wouldn't be a good idea, and the best they should try for if they go to a match is a tag where Steamboat just comes in for his trademark spots. Matt, I didn't think Steamboat looked any worse here than he looked at any other segment in Ring of Honor thus far. I thought he looked good.
This is just wrong. I think that whoever said this, I don't know who it was, but whoever said it is mistaken. I mean, honestly, everyone has their own opinion, but this is wrong. If you're saying that Steamboat looked any different than he did in other segments, no, he didn't. Go watch it yourself. You'll see.
This is the thing. This is the only explanation I can come for this comment, which is Steamboat. The one thing Steamboat was doing here, which I haven't really seen much of on the other Ring of Honor shows, was he was doing this classic Ricky Steamboat love it or leave it, really big facial expressions. Steamboat can sell really over the top facially, and you either like it or you don't like it. Sometimes for me it crosses the line, but I've seen matches from 1992, feuding with the Dangerous Alliance, great era Ricky Steamboat, where he did facial expressions just this big. But the only thing I can think of is if you're a fan that didn't really watch Steamboat at the time, and you're seeing that now, you might go, "Oh, this old man doesn't know what selling is. He's hokey or whatever." But this is, to quote Michael Cole, vintage Steamboat, Matt. It's nothing different than you would have seen back at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to believe that that's what they were referring to, but I guess it's possible.
Well, I agree. It's probably a stretch, but I can't come up with another reason why you would think, oh, this is the match where proves Steamboat doesn't have it anymore. Especially when we know years after this, he would have a legit good match with Chris Jericho. So
Yeah.
the idea that somehow this segment proved that, like, oh, he's broken. No, by no means.
No, definitely not.
And that brings us to the main event. That would be the Ring of Honor World Title match in what is, at least on CageMatch.com, they gave the stip as relaxed rules, there must be a winner. Samoa Joe defended the title against Homicide, and he won via pinfall in 20 minutes, 4 seconds after he hit a brainbuster. So, for this match, I felt like this might be my favorite match on the show, or right there with the Gen Next match now with my new hindsight evaluation of that match. It is not the do or die match. Like nothing I think it's impossible for Homicide and Samoa Joe to have a bad match against each other, but they have not hit the do or die match. And I don't know if they that height in my mind, and I don't know if they ever will again after that match. But I thought this was really good. I thought they did, the relaxed rules let them take the match in kind of a different direction. We see the one problem with that was I was kind of up and down the relaxed rules. So on the one hand, usually with no DQ matches, what we see is the refs still acting like it's a DQ match where they're like yelling at the wrestlers to stop doing things that would normally be illegal. So in a way, I like that it's relaxed rules because it still makes sense then for the refs to get on the wrestlers' cases. But on the other hand, I wrote down, here's the things we saw in this match. Let me just see here. By the end of this match, we saw a table spot, manager interference, chair shots, a person getting stabbed bloody with a fork multiple times. So at that point, it's kind of like, it should have just been called no DQ, because if that's relaxed rules, that's not relaxed rules, that's coma rules. Like, what would get you DQ'd if not? There's a spot in this match where you literally see the tines of a fork go into Samoa Joe's head and blood coming out of the holes in his head. Like, that's no DQ.
Yeah. Like, what is the point of the distinction? I get what you're saying, especially compared to, like you said, the other no DQ match on the show, which you couldn't even tell was no DQ for half of it, and then they just like throw each other on chairs. And this one, like we said, fork stabbing. What is the point of the distinction? I don't know. It's one of the things that you think about in early ROH where you're like, okay, they were not exactly on the ball with this in terms of consistency.
For the match itself, I felt like it was a little weird in the sense where it felt like chunks of this match were no DQ, and then chunks of this match were just Joe and Homicide trying to have their usual kind of like modern indie main event match. And I think it would have been more interesting as someone who's seen these guys wrestle a lot if they just went all the way into the no DQ realm. But they give you a bunch of stuff there. Again, I feel like it was a different look for Samoa Joe because I think he sold more for Homicide than he sold for pretty much anyone in his title reign up to this point. He let Homicide kick out of the Lariat and the Island Driver, which are moves he's won matches in this title reign with. They played off the do or die match where he goes for the second turnbuckle muscle buster again, which he won that match with, but Homicide reverses it into an ace crusher. So they do some neat callbacks there and some different things, and just a really enjoyable match. And it is fun to see like Homicide get closer to the win than a lot of guys do against Joe. And this also has maybe my favorite Joe elbow suicida dive ever, because the camera guy is looking at Homicide straight on the floor, and we just see the apron in like the fringes. And this is on a night of the camera missing stuff. This is a night where the missing the thing made it great, because you have no tip off at all that Joe is doing a dive, and he just comes into frame at 1,000,000 miles an hour out of nowhere, just crashes into Homicide, and it looks so great. That might be like one of my favorite dives ever. I just loved it. And yeah, this is also, I guess, the first time this is the first time that Joe ever bled. I don't know if that's true. He definitely bled from the hand when he cut on the guardrail at the second anniversary show. But yeah, an example again of how much he was giving Homicide. He lets Homicide stab him with the fork and draws like legit blood on. Not a huge amount of blood, but multiple trickles of blood. So, Matt, I've rambled on too long. What do you have to say about the match?
You rambled on just long enough. I actually this one I actually might have liked even slightly less than you. I thought it was good for sure. I really loved the beginning, because like I said, like there was like tons of streamers for the announcement of the wrestlers, and then they fight in the like big thing. It's like so basically they're tangled in streamers while like Joe does a backdrop onto Homicide, and even he has some streamers on him when he does that dive that you were just talking about. And I love when they start hot and heavy like that, and then Joe immediately goes from the dive to try the ole ole kick on Smokes, and Side cuts him off, and then he does the ole ole kick on Smokes, and I like that. I thought when they got into the ring, it kind of slowed down a bit, and I thought the crowd was kind of tired here. They do like they're trading headbutts, and Gabe reacts very much to the headbutts. But of course, having seen the Nigel McGuinness versus Bryan Danielson feud, these headbutts don't have quite the impact of those, but I'm sure they didn't feel good. At one point, though, I do enjoy that Joe does like a stunt puller on Homicide for a second. You certainly don't see that move much in Ring of Honor. But I do think that while Joe is in control, the crowd is pretty quiet. Of course, once Homicide goes for his dive and flies over Joe's head and through the table without even touching Joe, first of all, do you think that was intentional? That Homicide completely missed Joe on that dive?
I feel it's probably like Homicide's probably knowing that he's going to take the bump through the table and Joe's going to get out of the way. He's probably like aiming a little less.
Yeah.
Like he's feeling like he has more leeway. So maybe he's not trying to completely miss Joe, but he's like, I can afford to take this higher because I know he's not going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it still works. Like sometimes you go through a dive and you miss. So he overshot. He went right through that table.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that is when he pulls out the fork. And I thought once the fork came out, I liked the match a lot more, which I don't know, sounds depraved on my part. But I just said it made it different. Gabe made a big deal about the fact that this was the first time that Joe was busted open, quote unquote. Although I think it's less of a busting and more of a slicing. But Joe was bleeding. And it's funny because actually the blood dried up pretty quickly, but then Homicide sliced him again while in the STF. And like you said, you could actually see the tines hit Joe and blood come out. So remember we used to ask like, oh, is this an actual fork stabbing? Yes, it's an actual fork stabbing.
Yeah. For people that want to say, oh, like, I remember, this is a weird anecdote, but I remember once my parents, they used to go out to breakfast at this place where all the elders went. And once they went,
no, where is this going? I'm just kidding.
No, they went. They said there's this old guy that works that's here, and he says he used to wrestle for Stampede Wrestling, Trevor. And let me tell you, you know what he told us? He told us all blood in wrestling is fake. It's all ketchup. And I was like, Mom, Dad, that has to be a crazy old man. I guarantee you, he did not work for Stampede Wrestling if he thinks all blood in wrestling is ketchup. So I'm just gonna say, if that old man is ever listening to this show, watch this spot where you see an extreme close-up of a fork go into a man's head and blood come out, and tell me this is a ketchup-filled work fork, because it is not.
Oh, that was the most annoying thing growing up when, you grow up and like people tell you that it's all like blood capsules. Not ketchup, I never heard, but blood capsules. And and then you find out once you get a little bit more inside knowledge. So maybe like I found this out when I was like 12, like online, that about blading and stuff like that. And I would tell people, like adults that I knew, like my friends' parents and stuff like that, the guys cut themselves and stuff with razor blades. And the friends, of course, their parents are always completely incredulous. They're like, no, that's just what they want you to think. And I'm like, no, they want you to think that the other guy punched them into being bloody, right? That's what they don't want you to think that they cut themselves. But yeah, like people they would just think that you were naive because you knew anything about wrestling. Pet peeve. Anyway.
I remember as a kid finally convincing my mom, like showing her, like, look at this, Mom. That's real blood. Like this, this is one of those things. Why was this important to me as like a 12-year-old? But I remember finally convincing her and then being like, so they take a razor blade and they cut themselves in the forehead to make themselves bleed for real. And I was like, that's right. And she's like, that's so stupid. Why don't they use ketchup? And I was just like, God damn it. But it is one of those things where I think, too, it's weird because you're in this defense of they're not doing it for fake. They're cutting themselves in the head for real. And like you get used to defending it as like a point of pride, where to the average person that isn't a wrestling fan, that makes you sound like a crazy person. Like, yeah, you should respect this more because they're really like cutting their head and creating scar tissue. Like,
Right. For me, it was more of like a, hey, I know more about this than you for a change. Like, so you should trust me. But yes, no, exactly. It makes it seem depraved. It's pretty crazy, actually, like that during like the late 80s and like first half of the 90s when, like HIV was, obviously, at its deadliest, that there were just matches, like War Games matches, where lots of different guys were bleeding on each other at the same time. But hey, that's the wrestling business for you.
It's crazy that like hepatitis did more to stop, like hepatitis scares did more to stop bleeding in wrestling than HIV did, which
I guess maybe HIV is just harder to transmit. That's got to be it, because you would think, that like they're like this that would have become a thing in wrestling at some point, and it really never did.
For people that don't, I mean, I was very young during this era, but for people like I've watched documentaries on it, for people that weren't around or don't remember like the initial era where HIV and AIDS really came to be known, there was like a real panic among segments of the populace where like you would see news stories of like little hemophiliac children who had to get frequent blood transfusions getting run out of school by angry parents saying like, we're not going to let that kid give our kid AIDS, like not understanding how it is transmitted. So it is wild to me in that environment that wrestlers, like no one really seemed to have a problem with like massive bloodbaths, which were common in the 1980s.
Of course, that brings me to that kind of, I think, irresponsible HIV panic that indie promotion had a few months ago, where somebody was bleeding and they were like, "Everyone get tested," just because I don't want to get into it, but there's clearly like an ignorance about how that is spread and what the status of that is nowadays. But anyway, getting back to this. One of my favorite parts was as Homicide was fork stabbing Samoa Joe, Todd Sinclair goes, "Hey, Homicide, knock it off." he really does that. Go back. He literally says it. I thought that was so funny.
And that goes back to the relaxed rules. Like, if this is relaxed, like, what's a DQ? Like, does he have to shoot him? Like, I just like, Homicide, knock it off with this stabbing a guy in the face.
It was.
I'm gonna lose my temper if 5 more stabs, Homicide. You get 5 more.
Hey, Homicide, stop being such a nincompoop. I don't know, but that's what he said. No, he didn't say the nincompoop part, just the knock it off. But yeah, that makes the match memorable. And at this point, I think the match is really good. Like you said, Joe goes for the muscle buster. Samoa Joe, he reverses a pile driver into an Alabama slam. Homicide then actually hits the pile driver for 2. Joe does the slaps, the STF by Homicide, right? Then the Island Driver gets 2. Then I like that he actually wins with the Brainbuster because, again, Samoa Joe has won a lot with different moves over the course of this feud. He's really only won with the Muscle Buster, 3 times? And 2 of them were top rope Muscle Busters. So he's still really establishing himself. By like 2005, I feel like he won with the Muscle Buster pretty much all the time. Almost all the time anyway. Or the choke, or the choke, one of the two. But really, at this point, he wins with so many different things, and you don't really see too many wrestlers doing that at this point. But anyway, as far as the match, I thought it was a good, exciting match, but I wouldn't go much further than that.
I think for me, it plays good just because I've seen so many Samoa Joe Homicide matches. What this one has, even though it's not like the best in terms of actual in-ring action, it's just variety to me, which is like I think maybe the one difference between how we feel is I appreciate a bit more like just I'm thankful that this is memorable in a different way.
I think that's fair. I think that's a good point.
But like, there's little playoff things, like even stuff like, Homicide usually takes the standard Joe Uranagi in the corner where someone runs at Homicide and Joe grabs him and Uranagis him. And here in this time, Homicide like jumps off the second or top rope and Joe catches him and does it from that position. Like little changes like that. I just appreciate when guys do a little bit of work to switch things up. And I agree. I like that Joe can win in different ways. And I like the idea that not every indie main event match has to be back and forth near falls up to the last second where it's 50-50. I like the idea of this match where Homicide survived like the island driver and a lariat, and he doesn't make a big comeback. Like Joe grabs him, hits the brainbuster, and wins. And it's like, I like matches occasionally where it's a thing where, okay, you've survived moves A through S, but you're not going to make a comeback. I'm going to hit move T, and that's going to be enough. I like that finality, and it doesn't always have to be your move, my move, your move, my move, just one. It's over. I like that. So it was funny because Gabe kind of almost like downplayed the finish, because did you notice after the match, Gabe on commentary goes, where he's talking about Joe winning the brainbuster, he's like, maybe not the most spectacular move, but Homicide, it got the job done. It's like, you don't have to underplay a brainbuster. It's like he was kind of apologizing for it. But
Yeah, I wonder if Gabe told him, like, hey, I don't want that to be a finish anymore.
Yeah. After the match, Joe shakes an unconscious Homicide's hand, and then we cut to backstage where a somber prophecy is having a powwow. Moff and Whitmer are pissed at each other as usual. Moff feels like Whitmer wasn't there for him during the match. Moff says he's going to give the prophecy thing one last shot, and if they can't pull it together, he thinks it's time to end the whole thing. He walks away.
What I don't get is he made a big deal about how if they don't win the titles tonight, it's not going to work anymore. He's been like on the bubble of like quitting for a long time. So why is he giving one more chance? I wish that was explained more. Like what, like his motivation last time was, okay, they had a taste of the titles, so we're going to try again. Now what is it though? He was already threatening at the beginning of the show, if they didn't win tonight, he'd be giving up. And now it's like, okay, if we don't win next time, I'm giving up.
Yeah, it didn't go anywhere this time, and it even doesn't quite play with the last show where the end of the night on on Round Robin Challenge 3, it was like, all right, we're finally on the same page. Like, we might not like each other, but we got to stick together because we proved we can be the champions. And now they lose one match and they're like, well, time to end everything.
Well, I actually think I remember where this is going, and I guess it actually kind of does pay off in terms of a surprising way, which I won't say just now. But I had sort of forgotten that, and so it was like, But now, remembering it, the payoff, I mean, it might be problematic for us, but it is surprising.
Definitely surprised a lot of people. And then finally we cut back to the final segment at ringside. And I would say, Matt, that the number one thing Generation Next is known for is the formation of Generation Next and the 40 plus minutes 8-man tag. In a far back in second, it's remembered for being under the show that was done under the tent. I would say in a distant third, this is probably the third most thing this show is remembered for, which is we cut back to the ring where Gabe is frantically telling us that Homicide has snapped again. Homicide is standing alone in the ring as the crowd chants his name, which kind of hurts the idea that he's like snapping in a scary way. Gabe says what happened when we were off the air was unbelievable. Smokes hands Homicide the mic and he yells at the crowd, saying he doesn't need their fucking cheers. They respond by cheering him more. Homicide then throws a temper tantrum at ringside, throwing chairs as Gabe screams on commentary. Gabe screams that Homicide is demonic, has gone insane, and that nobody is safe.
The demon has risen!
Which, again, when you watch a bunch of smiling, laughing faces at ringside, as Gabe is like, no one is safe. Gabe says security and everyone is running when that is clearly not the case. Gabe shouts until his voice starts to leave like JR at the end of a 4-hour pay-per-view style, screaming that Homicide is going after the pillars of the tent. And we sign off, and this is what is remembered, as Gabe screams, evacuate! Evacuate! And,
yes. And of course,
that's how the show ends.
Like you said, the images on the screen don't match this, right? Because Homicide, I mean, he's walking around ringside just like throwing chairs, which wrestlers have done a bazillion times in history. They say he's going after the pillars in the tent. You really don't see that happening. And the fans are laughing and smiling and having a great time. So, yes, this just makes it seem like comedy. So that's, I guess, how we have to judge it. And it was very, very funny. So good job.
Like, I feel like on Through the Years, we are pretty fair with Gabe commentary, where I feel like some people really shit on Gabe's commentary on Ring of Honor. I think it's average. He has his definite negatives and definite pluses, and
yeah, he has some strengths for sure.
Gabe himself would probably admit that he wasn't a great commentator, but honestly, as we've documented on the show in painstaking detail, there were multiple people that were far, far worse than Gabe, a guy who wasn't, ever aspiring to be a commentator, performed. But this is the kind of thing where, like, there's no defending it. This is one of those things that people made fun of him for and remembered, and it's probably unfair that this colors a lot of people's memory of him, period, on commentary, but it definitely was, like you said, like, unintentionally hilarious.
Yeah, and this isn't just his commentary skills that are bad here. Like, this is just, like, bad, like, writing and plotting. Like, that, even if he hired, like, a great commentator to deliver that that point across, it still made no sense because it was still Homicide just like walking around ringside throwing chairs, with a bunch of happy fans. So like that, just like even conceptually, it's a failure, I think.
This was I think, with the Generation Next plot, like that whole show long angle and how Gabe changed up his booking. I feel like this is one of the best examples this show of Gabe doing a really good job booking and big ideas and changing up like the norms of his shows. Like, this is probably one of the better book shows in that sense that we've covered yet. But then it has to end with probably like one of like the worst, goofiest things he's done so far in the run, which is kind of sad because otherwise this is like an example of Gabe, I think, at his best in some ways.
Right. A lot of this was Gabe at his best. I would say the Punks with Steamboat stuff, obviously the Generation Next stuff. In some ways, even the Joe Homicide stuff. But then you also have, did you fucking shit in our bags, bro? And and then this. So you got more of the positive, the very positive, but you also got some of the really bad parts too.
Which is another thing I think that makes the show really interesting, is you kind of get like this grab bag of a lot of the best and the worst ideas of somebody while things are kind of in flux and exciting time. And
no violence against women tonight, right?
Nope. I mean, we got the long pandering camera shot to start the show, but yeah, no violence. Yeah. We did get the return of some homophobia, but take what you can get.
Yeah.
Well, you know what they say, Ring of Honor giveth and Ring of Honor taketh away. But so that brings us to the end of the show, and yeah, we've already started talking about it, but it's weird. I feel like this show, there's no can't miss match out of this, but I feel like if you're a fan of like the historical aspects of Ring of Honor, or if you're a person like, it's a must-watch show. And I think if you're like us, it's a super interesting show if you're watching every show because it's just so different and so notable in a bunch of ways.
Yeah, it's almost like worse than average recent ROH in terms of match quality overall, but it's still one of the most entertaining shows I've ever done. Clearly some historic booking and some very successful booking, some silly stuff too. But overall, I'd say like in terms of like a whole package of entertainment, I'd say it's bordering on excellent and certainly historic.
And for a company like Ring of Honor that lives or dies generally on match quality, how many shows are we ever going to be able to say that about, where it's like this show is really good kind of in spite of the wrestling, not because of it? Like, that's going to be that's a really rare thing to say about Ring of Honor.
Yeah, very few shows are going to be like that, but this is definitely one of them.
Yeah. So yeah, very interesting, very notable show. And that brings us to the plug. So if you want to contact us, ThROH@gmail.com, THROH, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at MayorMGF on Twitter. We have a thread on the Pro Wrestling Only message board and the Voices of Wrestling message board and their plug section forums. I have a Patreon where I say really stupid things completely unrelated to this about a bad message board. It is www.patreon.com/Mecca. That's MECCA twice. And yeah, that's about it. And next time on the show, we will be covering another incredibly noteworthy show, because we will be covering World Title Classic, the beginning of the famous Punk Joe 3-match 2004 trilogy, 60-minute time limit draw. We will cover it next time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, yeah, this whole era is every show from here on out for a while is just, I'm so excited. We've been waiting for this few month period since we started the show. It's so cool that we're here.
Yeah, like I'm really looking forward to the idea of like I love our guests, but I like just that this fall and winter it's going to be like I said at the start of the show, like just a cozy like this is so like my wrestling comfort food and
Yes.
my nostalgia, but it's hitting all my nostalgia buttons, and there's notable and really cool things on every show. Even though I've enjoyed like every show we've watched in different ways, like this is going to be like a really fun fall and winter to do this and to watch this, and it's going to be a blast. And so until next time, you should have a good time. Have a great time.